What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was betrayed as a child and came back with the eyes of judgment? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Eden. Rays of light spilled out from the heavens, shedding their warmth and magnificent energy onto the tanned skin of a woman. The rays refracted as they struck beads of perspiration, and reflected as they met the shiny blonde hair upon her head. Her smoldering green eyes glistened with pleasure as she swung her body gracefully in circles and sharp angles. Her muscles strained as she whipped from side to side, and moved her large weapon through the heavy pressure of the air. Grains of the desert sand sprayed up with every twist of her curvy body, and her simple yet white-purple outfit moved with her. Her breathing was labored in her efforts, but a look of pure peace on her face showed that her fatigue was not a bad thing, for she had been at this for several hours now. The young woman swung her weapon several more times, creating enormous gusts of sharp and dangerous winds. A clear, whoosh, sound could be heard if any person was in the area, but she knew she was alone. There was not another living creature for a mile in all directions, save for the occasional snake or lizard. She was completely alone, and she liked it that way. Four symmetrical, and quite spiky ponytails swayed as powerful gusts were created. The large weapon in the woman's hands was not the conventional tool of shinobi, but a special one that not many chose to take on. It was a very large, very heavy fan, made of thin sheets of metal, and painted white on one side, black on the other. A defining feature of this giant weapon was the three identical circles painted onto the white side of the fan, each an equal distance apart. These three circles were often the last thing an enemy would see before their unfortunate death. The woman, known as Tamari no Sabaku, older sister of the case cage, Gara no Sabaku, finished her intricate and beautiful dance with a final swoop and flick of her wrist to close the powerful weapon. She slammed the now sheathed fan into the sand directly in front of her, forcing it to stand up while she moved to take a swig from a water canteen. She wiped the sweat from her brow before scanning the desert with a slight smirk gracing her smooth features. Tamari was meant to be attending an important, yet extremely boring meeting in place of the case cage this fine afternoon, but opted to take the day off and spend it training instead. She figured her other brother Kankuro, an irresponsible womanizer of sorts, could take on the role in her place. It wasn't like he got the boring stuff much anyway. He deserved a good day or two in a room with ancient old buffoons rather than her, who worked hard every day of her life. The fan wielder stretched out her muscles to be sure that they would remain loose in her inactivity, and replaced her canteen at her hip. She had finished with her planned training session for the day, but still had a few hours to spare. She figured it was about 1 p.m., according to the sun, which meant she had a good 3 or 4 hours before she would be forced to head home. The desert nights were one thing anyone would want to avoid, as the temperature dropped extremely low without the sun to warm the sand. With time to spare, the young blonde had to think of something else to do to fill her time. Luckily for her, she knew exactly the thing that would round off her day perfectly. A nice relaxing dip in the waters of the desert oasis. It was like her little Eden at times like this, for very few people would brave the harsh desert in order to reach the lovely pool, and many did not know of its existence. It was the perfect place for her to relax in solitude. Tamari picked up her fan and maneuvered it into her obi from over her shoulder. When it was in place, she took a deep breath, funneling chakra to her feet, and then took off at top speed in the direction she knew the oasis was located. The chakra in her feet allowed her to move without risking a twisted ankle on the uneven and unpredictable dunes of the Suna Desert. As the wind whipped her bangs around, she couldn't help but grin happily as she moved. Today was the perfect day. Nothing and nobody could possibly ruin it for her, and she was positive nothing could make it better either. Or that was what she thought. The blonde had been running for about 10 minutes, and her chakra reserves were beginning to run low. Having had used a lot of chakra in her training session, Tamari was already low to begin with. She hadn't realized until she began to feel the fatigue pulling at her body. She stopped the chakra flow to her feet, and allowed them to sink into the hot depths of the sand. She stood there for a moment, allowing herself to adjust to the temperature, before she took off at a slower, more careful run. She had only been moving for 5 minutes when her toe caught on something and she was sent tumbling forward. As a skilled shinobi, she reacted quickly, and moved into a roll, before coming back up with a kunai in hand. There was no enemy in sight. Tamari sighed in slight relief, knowing she would not have the energy to fight off an attacker, and replaced her kunai within the folds of her dark purple obi. She stood to her full height and moved forward to investigate the rock she had tripped on. The only odd thing was that there was no rock. Curious, she dug through the fluid grains before she found the deep blue of a sandal, and the pale flesh of toes. The woman's face drained of blood as she realized what she had discovered. It was a dead body, she was sure of it. Her hand trembling ever so slightly, Tamari moved more of the sand to the side, practically shoveling it full on, and soon revealed the face of a man. A pang shot through her stomach and chest as she realized who it was. She had seen this man once before, a long time ago. A young boy was sitting on a black cushioned bench across from her, twiddling his fingers idly, one hand bandaged. He wore a simple green flak jacket, which was custom for most chunin of Konoha. Under that jacket was a gray vest and fishnet tee. His hairstyle was strikingly odd, resembling that of a pineapple, a spiky ponytail sitting atop his head. Tamari sat with her legs crossed, waiting with the boy. She had just saved him from certain death and returned him to the village. His friends were not so lucky, two of which were in critical condition, and were being treated by the Hokage herself. The young blonde was merely waiting with the boy to hear the news of the other shinobi. It was her duty. Fed up with his nervousness, she broke the silence. "There's nothing you can do being nervous." Her deep voice explained, "Sacrifices are given when it comes to missions. You've undergone psychological training, haven't you?" She was merely trying to console him as she would have in her village, but his glare clearly showed she had failed. Things were so different in this country, so straightforward, with no emotional barriers. It was odd to her. His voice sounded in response. "Training is different from real missions." His voice sounded annoyed, but she didn't know why. "I knew what missions were. I thought I knew that the life of a ninja was like this. The mission was my first time appointed as group leader. That's when I knew." He paused, looking at his lap, before peering back up at her. "I was not cut out to be a ninja." Tamari could not understand why this boy was spilling his every emotion to her. She was practically a stranger to him. Her response showed her thoughts, unexpectedly fragile. "Aren't you? Even though you're supposed to be a man." She knew it would hit a sore spot with him. He was a chauvinist, as she had discovered in their Chunin exam battle. It was harsh, even for her. Shikamaru stood, not willing to hear her anymore. He was becoming too emotional. "Even though I was appointed group leader, the only thing I could do was trust everyone." He looked down. "I was too naive. I didn't have enough strength. It's all my fault." His fist clenched at his side. Tamari was appalled by his words. "Are you afraid of getting hurt?" she asked, her outrage apparent in her voice. Shikamaru merely turned and walked away, avoiding the question, and stab at his manhood. That was when she heard the voice of an older man. A man that resembled the boy who had sat in front of her very much. The only difference was a goatee and two gruesome battle scars. She assumed it was the boy's father. His words were what brought the boy to tears, and his words were one thing that helped inspire her to become a better ninja than she already was. She would not forget that day, not for a long time. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, had revealed his name, Shikaku Nara. Tamari lifted the man's head and placed it into her lap. She studied his torn and bloodied body with horrified eyes. Her first instinct was to check for a pulse, despite the fact that he looked completely lifeless. She reached for the man's wrist, but before she could touch his skin, his hand snapped to her own wrist, gripping it painfully hard. The man's eyes snapped open, and Tamari jumped in surprise. He stared at her, wide-eyed, before his expression softened slightly, and a small smile played on his lips. "Are you an angel sent to take me to heaven?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Have I actually made it to paradise?" Before Tamari could answer, the Nara slipped back into the comfort of unconsciousness. The blonde checked his pulse to be sure, and a very weak beat could be felt through the flesh of his wrist. He was alive, but barely. Upon inspection of his cuticles, the young woman could see that he was severely dehydrated. He had probably been out in the desert for at least a day or more. She needed to get him water immediately. Reaching for her water canteen, she carefully screwed off the cap, before tipping the bottle over the man's mouth, which she forced open with her other hand. Despite his unconscious state, the water went down without issue. She capped the container after emptying it into his mouth. Tamari lifted the man as she stood, supporting his weight by slinging his arm over her shoulder and virtually dragging him along with her. He was heavy, but she was strong, her training with a large fan strengthening her muscles greatly. The young woman knew that she needed to get the man out of the sun and to some place safe. The closest place she could think of was the oasis she had been headed to in the first place. There was plenty of water there to drink, shade from a few palm trees, and she knew she could care for him better there. It didn't take long for Tamari to reach the oasis, as she had only been a 5-minute run away when she encountered Shikaku Nara in the sand. As she arrived, she lay the man down on the grass under a palm tree, before surveying the area quickly. It looked as it did the last time she had been there. There was a large pool of crystal clear water, surrounded by green grass, ferns, and several palm trees. The entire oasis was rather large, coming in at about an acre in size. There were no enemies or predators in sight, so the young woman deemed the area safe. She moved back to the man's side, kneeling down slowly to inspect his wounds once more. She tore a small piece of material from the end of her silk obi and moved to the water to soak it for a moment before returning to Shikaku's side. She removed his torn and bloodied fishnet shirt, folding it and placing it next to his body delicately despite the fact that it was ruined. From a random location within the folds of her obi, she produced a jar of ointment and placed it on top of the shirt. "This might sting, Shikaku Nara," she whispered, knowing he likely would not hear her, "but it will make you better." With that said, the young woman dabbed at the man's wounds, cleaning sand and blood from them. She knew the salt content in the sand and the rough texture of it would hurt quite a lot, but in his safe unconsciousness, he seemed fine. She dabbed for a few moments before rinsing the material in the water and continuing. This went on until the wounds were completely clean. As she studied the gashed, she noticed their odd patterns. 3 parallel scratches all an inch apart. Several crossed one another. She took a mental image of these markings before covering each gash with the sticky ointment she had in a small jar. As she left the man to sleep and heal, the ointment was specially made, and would help to speed up the healing process. Tamari removed her sweat and blood-stained clothing, starting with her torn obi, dress, fishnet and chest-binding bandages. During this time, she folded each garment, placing them in a neat pile at the edge of the water. She glanced behind her to peer at the man to ensure he was still unconscious, before she moved forward into the cool water of the oasis. Her hips swayed from side to side as she waded into the water. The curves of her buttocks were quite voluptuous, and her waist and hips made a delicious hourglass shape. As she moved deeper and deeper into the water, her thick, muscled thighs were swallowed up by the pool, followed by her bottom, then waist, and she finally stopped in the middle, where the water reached the bottom of her shoulder blades. She wiggled her toes in the sand and waited for her body to adjust to the temperature before diving into the pool and swimming in tight circles under the surface for a few moments. As she ran out of air, she quickly broke through the calm waters, taking a deep breath to fill her lungs and shaking the water out of her hair. As rivulets upon rivulets cascaded down her body, she could only stand there and enjoy the cool liquid. Her ponytails were dropping quite sadly, and deciding her hair could use a good rinsing, she removed each elastic one by one and slid them onto her wrists. Tamari leaned back, dipping her head into the water in order to wet her hair once more. As she arched her back, the toned muscles of her stomach could be seen by anyone who could have been in the area watching. Her full, supple S, complete with hard, puckered S, seemed to float just above the surface of the water. The young woman ran her fingers through her hair several times under the water before straightening her body and turning to look at the man she had saved. Her eyes widened when they landed on him. She hadn't realized that he was conscious. Not only that, but he was watching her with an expression that could only be described as pure, uncensored lust. Part of her felt the urge to beckon him into the water with her. Another part told her to go to him. He was injured. At the same time, she felt a hint of embarrassment and shyness, wanting to cover herself to avoid his dark roaming eyes. "You really must be an angel. Is this paradise, my dear? Do I get to live here with you forever?" the gruff voice of Shikaku growled, his voice husky both from his slight arousal and his time under the sand. In response, Tamari chose her second option, wading through the cool, clear water towards the heavily scarred man. As she went, rivulets continued to make their way down her body. One sneaky stream made a path between her S and slid all the way down her toned stomach and disappeared into the pool. She continued her approach, her body becoming more and more exposed as she came closer and closer to the man. Her S bounced ever so slightly with each step. Her hips swayed from side to side as she moved. Her lips curved into a small, mischievous smile. The shaved V of her pelvis revealed itself. Her strong, thick thighs tightened and relaxed when she exited the water. She glistened like there were diamonds embedded in her skin, the sun forcing rays of light to scatter off her body in every direction. Her wet hair clung to her neck and cheeks, but she ignored it all, focused solely on the Nara in front of her. Her nudity and his interest intrigued her. The possibilities beckoned her. Her loins burned, tightened and moistened all at once in response to the thoughts spinning through her mind. But he was injured. She could be gentle. He was probably married too. His wife probably thought he was dead. What about Shikamaru? It was clear he liked her, and she kind of liked him. Shikamaru could be useful. Plus, he had the pig to entertain himself. Shikaku was old. Oh, but he was damn why in that dark, battle-worn kind of way. His scars made her want him bad, and his smoldering eyes made him even more desirable. His toned and muscled body only topped off the list of reasons she was attracted to him. The goatee simply completed the perfect picture, and her mind flashed images of her fingers gripping his hair as the pair entwined. The young woman stood before Shikaku for a few moments, unable to make a decision in her current state of mind. Seeing the man shirtless and looking into his eyes made her stomach tighten and her skin warm. He was needy, that much she could tell, and he was clearly attracted to her. Her morals screamed, "Put your clothes on, you whore," but at the same time, her body screamed, "God yes, just do it already." Shikaku simply stared up at her, mesmerized and entranced by her glistening beauty. "I'm not an angel, Nara," she said, lowering herself to eye level and leaning over him slightly. "You're not dead, but that's a good thing, because—" Her fingers traced the edge of one of his already healing wounds, causing him to grimace slightly, "because I would hate for a body like this to go to such waste." The man watched her, his eyes boring into her own. She stared at him too, looking deep into the obsidian orbs that were his eyes. They were like smoking coals cooling after a long night of smoldering in a fire. She couldn't look away from him, she was entranced by those eyes. Despite this, she noticed when he smiled at her, his chapped lips turning up and stretching over his teeth. His muscles flexed ever so slightly as he moved to sit up, hissing in pain as his wounds pulled and stretched with the movement. He reached for the woman before him, and Tamari instinctively complied. Tamari leaned closer, kneeling between the man's legs with one hand next to his head for support. As she studied his wounds and gently traced the edge of each scratch slowly, his hand snaked up her body, starting at the back of her left thigh, around the curve of her buttocks, caressing the small of her back, and coming to a rest at her waist, where his fingers never ceased to move. "You're so beautiful," Shikaku murmured, his voice deliciously why with its gruff, growly tone. "How could you not be an angel come to whisk me away to heaven?" He paused momentarily, licking his dry, cracked lips. "Or are you my guardian angel, sent to save me from death?" Tamari didn't speak. Instead, she leaned over him even farther, closing the space between their lips and kissing him lustily. His dry lips were rough against hers, but she continued regardless, sucking and nibbling at them with every opportunity. Her cheeks heated as he gripped her bottom hard, but she did not move away. It was Shikaku who separated the kiss, but only to roll the still glistening Tamari onto her back. He flinched subtly in pain as his wounds pulled from the movement, but he ignored it, his mind focused on her body and nothing else. Shikaku could not resist this beautiful, woman before him. She looked so perfect and bright that she had to be an angel, he knew it. Besides, how could he have survived such an attack alone in the desert? He had to be dead. Was she his reward for a good life? He certainly hoped so. Her body glistened so magically, the sun reflecting off the wetness of her skin. As he gazed at her intensely, he noticed her slightly uncomfortable look, and eased up on the staring. It was just that she was so breathtakingly gorgeous that he had trouble looking away. Had trouble keeping his mind from imagining her beneath him, writhing and moaning his name over and over again. She moved out of the water after a moment, approaching him slowly and revealing each part of her body section by delicious section. Her full, round S were the first to be revealed. Her S visibly hardened the moment they were out of the water, and the mounds sagged ever so slightly without the water holding them up. Next, her toned, perfect stomach came into view, rivulets of water streaking down her milky white skin. His mouth became slightly dry as he saw more of her, while his loins heated. Last to be revealed was her hairless pelvis, followed by her long, muscled legs. He couldn't help but watch as the muscles tightened and loosened as she walked, and how the sneakiest rivulets of water made their way between her legs, disappearing out of view. As she lowered herself onto him, denying her Anglicism, he couldn't help but to grow warmer and firmer. She traced each wound slowly and carefully, causing stinging and tingling sensations at the same time. His pain tolerance made it seem rather enjoyable instead of being painful. He watched her closely as she moved even closer to him. Her lips were so moist and inviting, gorgeous pink things, just begging him to accept them. They pressed themselves against his own lips, moving ever so slightly against his in a series of small kisses. He gripped her buttocks tightly in response, silently begging her to move even closer. He deepened the kiss by forcing his tongue into her mouth, chasing hers in an endless game of cat and mouse. She tasted like mint and tea, with a tiny hint of cinnamon. It was delicious and intriguing all at once. Unwilling to surrender all control to this beautiful, perfect woman, Shikaku rotated his hips quite forcefully, a hand moving to her back to support her, and the other to the ground to support himself. In this quick reversal of positions, he temporarily forgot about his injuries, however, and winced in pain as his wounds pulled in protest. He quickly ignored it, choosing instead to focus on the naked woman beneath him. She stared up at him, her eyes lidded, her lips begging for more of his. He obliged, swooping down to claim her lips with his. Her legs snaked around his waist and he moved a hand to grip her thigh. His other hand moved to her left, pressing into it firmly before flicking his thumb over the nub of her. She moaned in response, the sweet satisfaction in her voice sending blood rushing to his manhood. He wanted to hear that sound again and again. He pinched the same and twisted it ever so slightly, receiving another delicious moan in response, accompanied by an arching of her back. He broke their heated kiss once more, moving them to her neck, her jaw, and her ear, where he whispered huskily into it. "Moan for me again, angel." She seemed to oblige as he tugged on her once more, her voice needy and desperate this time. Shikaku could barely control himself. His mind was swimming with lust and flashing images of what he wanted to do with this woman. As the blood left his head to seek his nether regions, he lost more and more common sense, and simply acted on instinct. His lips left her neck and moved to her right S, where he proceeded to suck, nibble and lick the hungrily. He tugged on the opposite with his fingers, twisting and flicking it at the same time as his lips worked. His reward was a series of moans and twitches from the woman beneath him, each moan getting slightly louder than the last. As he looked up, he saw that her eyes were closed and her mouth was open as she gasped in pleasure. He could no longer hold back. He needed to be inside her, now. Shikaku reached between them and unbuttoned his black pants. He carefully slid them down and kicked them off, taking his boxers with them. He gripped his throbbing member, ready to enter her, before looking up for confirmation. The eyes that locked with his were orbs of pure lust and need. They reminded him of the ocean of Kirigakure, blue-green swirls that were so inviting you almost wanted to jump right in. The man took her needy gaze as his confirmation, and with one quick and forceful thrust, he was inside. The woman's cry of pain made him stop immediately as his eyes snapped up to hers. Her brows were pressed together and her eyes were closed tight. A look of pure pain was on her face, and a wave of worry washed over Shikaku. He looked down to see a streak of red coating his manhood. She was a virgin. Of course, Shikaku could have guessed that had his mind been working. She was an angel, he knew, so she could not have had the chance to lay with a man before. Angels could not do so. Angels were forbidden to have, right? "Don't worry, angel, the pain will go away soon," Shikaku said in a soothing, calming voice. He moved again, pulling himself all the way out of her before pressing back in, slowly this time. Her insides gave way as he entered, gripping him snugly. He pulled back out once more, before entering again and repeating this process several times before he heard the woman groan impatiently. "F faster, please," she begged him, her voice husky and full of arousal. Shikaku obliged, and he picked up the pace immediately, moving progressively faster as he thrusted in and out of her hot, wet depths. Her legs tightened around his waist and her back arched in pleasure as she cried out. Her voice only spurred him on, making him move faster and faster, and slam into her harder and harder. A clear wet smacking could be heard as his testicles slapped against her skin. It was a sound that made his tongue crave her juicy wetness. Tamari writhed underneath Shikaku, arching her back, tightening her legs around him, curling her toes and gripping his hair with increased fervor as time passed and pleasure increased. Sweat began to drip down Shikaku's forehead, sliding down his temples in slithery, sticky streams. His efforts were not without rewards, however, as the woman beneath him shuddered and moaned louder and louder with every passing second. It wasn't long before both Tamari and Shikaku were reaching their limit. Tamari's climax began first, but twitching and spasming of her stomach muscles, and cries of pure ecstasy. The tightening within her drove Shikaku to his own climax, as he began to groan and pant while still pounding into her at full force. With a final thrust, he released his seed within her, a long groan of relief accompanying it. Both of them collapsed in a heap of flesh and body fluids, Shikaku resting his head between Tamari's large bosoms. The two rested there for several moments, their chests heaving to gain oxygen. Shikaku pulled out of Tamari only when his body allowed him to move. He rolled onto his back and stared up at the sky in wonderment. Tamari rolled onto her side, her face flushed with the heat of. She stared at the man for a few moments, and he stared back at her, his eyes boring into her deep into hers. His eyes were fogged over slightly, which couldn't be noticed unless you were looking right at them, and as they stared at one another, a sliver of truth passed through his eyes. "Do you still think you're dead, and I'm an angel, Nara?" He closed his eyes and groaned audibly, but did not say a word. He simply lay there, wishing his original thoughts were true. He wanted her to be an angel. He wanted to be in heaven where he would have a good day every day. He wanted to be rewarded and he wanted Tamari to give that to him. He couldn't accept the truth. The truth meant that he had just committed adultery and that his wife would leave him and his son would never forgive him. "Oh God, Shikamaru," the man groaned. Shikaku knew full well that his son had been in love with Tamari. The two had worked together on the Chunin exams for years. He saw how they flirted and how they fought. They were great for each other. Shikaku had just ruined that, ruined her, and it was all because he couldn't keep his in his pants. His son would be devastated. This was horrible, beyond horrible, actually. It was like hell on earth. "I have to get back to Konoha," Shikaku stated, attempting to get to his feet. "You can't. Your wounds aren't healed. You'll never make it back by yourself," Tamari argued, sitting up quickly and putting a hand on his shoulder to stop him. "You've done enough, haven't you? You tricked me. You seduced me. I have to go, and you're not going to stop me." Shikaku got to his feet, paused for a moment to look back at her, before he dressed himself and began to hobble away from paradise. He vowed never to look at another woman again, let alone her. She made him do it. She tricked him. She forced him to commit a crime against his wife, and he would never be able to look at her the same. He was ashamed and he was going to be punished for his mistake. For Shikaku, he would forever be banished from paradise. There was nothing he could do about it now. Shikaku lay in his bed, his eyes closed, but his mind still very active. He couldn't sleep. He had so much swirling around in his head. First and foremost, he thought about her, the woman who tempted him. Tamari. His thoughts were angry at first, but deep down, he still craved her body. He wanted to touch her again. He wanted to feel her silky skin under his fingers. He needed to. He ached with the need. He didn't look at his wife the same. She seemed like a kind of food he got tired of. She annoyed him now. He hadn't been able to look his son in the eye, but whether or not the boy noticed, he didn't show. Shikaku couldn't help but wonder if the woman he had left in the desert had the same problem as him. Tamari groaned audibly before rolling over in her bed for the nth time that night. Her loins were burning with need, and she knew it was because of the man she found in the desert. He made her crazy. There were times when she flushed bright red in the middle of a meeting because her mind drifted to their activities together. She craved him so much that she found her mind drifting to him more and more often. She needed a release from this need she felt. As she rolled over once again, she couldn't help but wonder if Shikaku felt the same way. She had been exiled from Eden, banished from the haven that was his body. She had to do something. She had to get back into his life somehow. She was miserable. She was suffering. There had to be a way. He had been tempted by her and he had liked it, loved it. He wanted her again. He wanted the utopia that he had experienced in the desert. He needed her more than he ever needed anything before. The problem was, he couldn't. He had a wife and a son and a village. He couldn't find her and have her. He was exiled from Eden. Tamari was tired of not sleeping. She was tired of always thinking of him and never getting anything done. She couldn't live like this. It had been weeks since she watched him leave. She had to see him, but how? Her mind drifted through the possibilities at light speed. Her brother could organize a mission for them. No, that would be too easy for him to decline. Perhaps she could go on a liaison mission and just happen to cross his path. That would be too complicated and he would probably avoid her. These possibilities kept swirling through her head until she found what she needed. Shikamaru, his son. The kid was so much like his father, but lacked the life experience and the maturity to interest her like the older man did. She had flirted with him and toyed with him for her own amusement, and maybe one day she could have loved him, but that was all over now. She had tasted a forbidden fruit, and she liked it. Shikaku was deliciously wise with his gruff voice, scarred body, strong arms and sculpted chest. He had the experience and knowledge that she needed from a man, and Shikamaru would be the key to getting this. How? She would use the boy's attraction to her to get to his father. She would hang around him, turn on the flirt tenfold, and make him fall hard for her. Then, she would hang around his house more and more often, seeing his father secretly when the rest of the household was asleep. It was perfect. The first step was getting to Konoha. She would speak to her brother about it. As the case cage, Gaara could give her any mission she asked for, no matter how silly. She would propose a village relations meeting and go to Konoha under the ruse of getting to know more about the village and the country as a whole. She would seduce Shikamaru, and this would give her complete access to his home and to his father. She just hoped with all of her heart that Shikaku was not going on any missions yet after his ordeal. With an excited sigh, Tamari closed her eyes and fell asleep immediately. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, dreaming of what lay ahead of her. Soon enough, she would be near him again. Shikamaru sighed quite dramatically, picking earwax out of his ear as the Hokage lectured him about being a good guide. He was being given another silly mission of showing the Suna liaison around Konoha. As if she didn't know her way around already. Regardless, Tsunade made this mission seem extra important. There was something about making a good impression. He honestly didn't feel like hearing it. The liaison, Tamari, would just bitch at him the whole time anyway, putting her hands on those round hips of hers and glaring at him with those deep, blue-green eyes. The Nara sighed again, this time more wistfully. Tsunade, unfortunately, took it as an insult and screamed at him just a little louder, however possible that was. Shikamaru only rolled his eyes and nodded, before taking his leave like the coward he was. As he got outside, he lit up a cigarette, inhaling deeply and savoring the nicotine rush that always calmed his nerves. Tamari was to arrive in roughly half an hour. If he valued his life, he had better get to the gates pronto. The Suna princess liked to be early. He couldn't imagine why, though. Being early was never good for anyone. It inconvenienced him, and if he was on time, she would be angry and accuse him of being late, and it would inconvenience both of them. How troublesome, he thought. Shikamaru arrived at the village gates in only a few minutes, strolling up to the open doors casually, both hands buried deep in his pants pockets. He looked around lazily for a moment, seeing nobody but the gate guards in the immediate area. He sighed and gazed longingly at the fluffy clouds floating slowly up in the sky. How he wished he could be up there instead of here, waiting to be bitched out for something or another. He couldn't help but be excited to have her around again though. The woman was the perfect mental sparring partner for Shikamaru. She pushed his buttons and he pushed hers. It kept him constantly on his toes and ready to throw back a witty insult in response to hers. Not only that, but he had to admit to himself that she was pretty nice on the eyes, scary, but nice. Flashes of memories spun through the dark-haired man's mind as he waited patiently for Tamari to arrive. The images were from all their encounters. The Chunin exams, where they fought, both flexing their mental muscles in an attempt to outthink the other. That mischievous smile when she saved his life. Those long luscious legs crossed teasingly as he awaited news on his best friend's life, and her concerned look when she watched him cry like a wimp. The way her breath quickened just a little bit when he leaned in close to whisper a strategy for defeating another wind user. Walking through Konoha with her after a long day planning the Chunin exams and sharing quick looks at one another. Every time he saw her, he felt like he was coming home, because like the saying went, the home is where the heart is, and she had his heart a long time ago. Of course, the Nara was a coward, even now, after the death of his sensei. He would never be able to act on his feelings because he was too afraid of what she would say and how she would tease him. Did she like him the same way? Was she attracted to him like he was to her? Did she just think of him as a kid to amuse herself with? A woman like her had to have all the best guys chasing her. Why would she want someone like him? Shikamaru sighed longingly, staring at the clouds once more, and wishing he could live a simple life like they did. He just wanted to float along without a care in the world. The Nara was snapped out of his calm oblivion when the sound of a familiar humph entered his ears. He opened one eye to look at the approaching woman, and it took all his restraint to keep the other eye closed and his expression impassive. Her outfit was a lot different than the last time. She had foregone the traditional, professional kimono for a more form-fitting, little dress. There was no more of her genin-styled asymmetrical look. This was all symmetry with fishnet and an unbelievably short skirt. Shikamaru practically began to salivate like she was a juicy piece of steak. Keeping his face expressionless, Shikamaru sighed dramatically, before opening the other eye and stretching as if he had just woken from a good nap. He glanced at the sky to gauge the time, before speaking in a lazy, drawled tone, "You're only 10 minutes early, woman. Do you have a fever or something?" His words drew a flicker of annoyance to her face, and he reveled in it for just a moment before turned away from her to begin walking into the village. "Well, I didn't want to be waiting around here for you to show up, lazy ass," she retorted hotly, her tone all hostility with only a hint of playfulness. Shikamaru loved this game they played. They walked side by side, but never came close enough to ever bump arms. The pair reported to the Hokage immediately, before heading over to Tamari's hotel room. The walk was so familiar that it allowed Shikamaru to zone out completely, with nothing but fantasies playing out in his mind's eye. With every step, his racing mind came up with a new scene. Just as his pants were getting a little bit uncomfortable, the pair reached the hotel that Tamari always stayed at. He approached the front desk with a lazy canter, and waited for the attendant to acknowledge them. Only when she looked up did Shikamaru speak. "I need Tamari-sama's usual room, if you don't mind." "I'm sorry, but that room is booked, Shikamaru-kun," the older woman squeaked, shaking her head sadly. "Actually, all of our rooms are booked. Didn't you remember that the Hyugas were staying here while the greater part of their clan home was repaired?" Shikamaru audibly cursed, smacking the side of his head for his stupidity. He had forgotten all about the flood at the Hyuga complex. How something that important could slip his mind could only be explained by his distraction. Well, I don't know what else we can do then. I forgot about the flooding." He paused, allowing idea after idea to cycle through his brain at top speed. "Well, I suppose it's the only thing that can be done. Tamari, you will have to crash at my place while you are here. My apartment is sectioned off, but it is attached to my family home. I hope you don't mind." "Are you kidding me? I have to stay at your shitty apartment because the useless Hyugas couldn't protect their own home from a little flooding? You have to be fucking kidding me, this is ridiculous. I am here on official business as liaison between Konoha and Sanagakure." She fumed for a moment, her expression all hate. "I will be telling my brother of this." As the pair turned and walked away, Tamari smiled to herself, hiding it so Shikamaru could not see. This was perfect. She would be right next door to the person she had been fantasizing about for months. That scarred, fantastic man she fucked at the Oasis. This could not be any better. Tamari was going to be with him again, if it killed her. Tamari pressed against him, pushing him firmly against the hard brick wall. Her S were round and full, peeking out of the top of her lavender tank top like overripe fruit ready for the picking. Her half-lidded, lust-filled eyes bore into him, as if she were staring into his very soul. She kissed him then, her lips attacking his in a passionate, desperate attempt to feel something. She forced her tongue into his mouth, tasting him and loving every moment of it. He tasted spicy with a little hint of tobacco, which was a strange combination. Their tongues wrestled like that for several moments before they pulled away for breath. In that split second, her mouth found his neck and she bit him, hard. Blood welled out of the wound and dripped into and around her mouth, creating red streaks on his tan skin. He cried out in pain, stifling it at the last second to keep the volume hushed. His hissed at her, enduring her attack with as much composure as he could. Tamari could feel the bulge in his pants pressing into her thigh as she pressed against him, but for some reason, it did not turn her on. It revolted her. She felt ashamed and guilty. She had once considered Shikamaru a possible UAL partner for herself, and even imagined it in detail. That idea seemed silly now, almost perverse. How could she have ever thought Shikamaru was desirable in the slightest? He was a child 3 years her junior. He wasn't wise or mature. He was boring. She couldn't stop now though. She needed to keep this charade up while she would Shikaku. If she let her true feelings show, the boy would know what was up and she would no longer be allowed in his home. She needed to stick around long enough to do what she needed to do to win back the one man she could never live without. Shikaku did what nobody in the world could do. He made her feel like a woman. Shikamaru was the key to his father, and she would not allow her feelings to stop her plan. She would have Shikaku, no matter what the cost was. Shikaku knew Tamari was there. Shikamaru had reintroduced her to his father when he first brought her into his home. Of course, the young Nara only thought this was the second time the two of them were meeting since the Chunin exams years ago. He completely missed the look of loathing Shikaku gave the blonde. Tamari ignored it for the time being, completely confident in her ability to win him back. That was why Tamari was currently where she was, letting the younger shadow user molest her body right outside the door of his apartment. She was waiting for her plan to come to a close. As Shikamaru's left hand slid under her shirt and began to squeeze and fondle her, the light sound of footsteps could be heard in the distance. Any second now, she thought, continuing the scene with as much passion as she could muster. She reached her hand down between Shikamaru and herself, sliding it down his muscled stomach until it reached her goal. She gently massaged the bulge in his pants until he pulled his head back and moaned softly. That was when she heard a gravelly gasp behind her, and the sound of a bag dropping onto the gravel. Mission success. Shikamaru, what do you think you are doing? His voice was intoxicating. That gruff growl made her insides heat up more than some nervous fondling from Shikamaru ever could. She grinned like a wolf who had caught her prey, before turning her heavily lidded eyes on Shikaku. His son, on the other hand, was stiff as a board, stuttering uncontrollably. Dad, I was. We were. For a genius, he sure lacked a few nuts and bolts in that thick skull of his. Tamari rolled her eyes subtly, before turning her grin up a notch. What does it look like, old man? A little foreplay before the real fun begins. But you wouldn't know what that's like, would you? Been a while, hasn't it? Or are you simply going senile with your old age? Her tone was mocking, even though she knew full well that it was all lies. Tamari. Shikamaru groaned, his face beat red with embarrassment. Nara Shikamaru, you are on official business with the liaison of Sanagakure. This is wholly inappropriate and you should have known better. Get inside this instant and contemplate what you have done, Shikaku commanded, his tone slightly angry, with a slight edge to it that the blonde recognized immediately. Shikamaru did not need to be told twice. He stumbled into his apartment without waiting for Tamari to follow. She wasn't about to, either. As she stood there, leaning against the brick wall of the house, Shikaku rushed forward, thrusting his forearm across her collarbone forcefully. The pressure kept her from moving much, though she wouldn't have anyway. He stared at her, his face close enough to hers that she could smell the sake on his breath. His eyes were filled with a mix of anger and desire, and she couldn't help but grin at her accomplishment. He was cracking slightly. She knew it. Leave my son out of this, you damned she-devil. Tamari laughed at this, genuinely amused at the switch from angel, at their first encounter, to devil, now. How quickly views can change. Admit you have been dreaming of me, that you want to fuck me just as much as I want to fuck you, and I'll leave your son alone, she whispered huskily. He's in love with me, you know. I could lead him on for ages and he would never know. Shikaku growled in frustration, pressing his arm harder and harder into her collarbone until it was hard for her to breathe. Her composure never wavered, however, and it was only a few moments before he released her and stormed off into his own section of the family compound. Tamari couldn't help but grin again. It was only a matter of time before he would shatter. She just needed to keep chipping away at his resolve and he would be hers again. The next few days were boring. Tamari was led around town by her guide, even though she knew Konoha almost as well as she knew her own village. Shikamaru seemed to be avoiding eye contact, blushing whenever she happened to glance his way. It was ridiculous and immature, and she hated every moment of his silly games. She needed to fix this so she could continue her charade. If Shikaku was going to give in, he needed a bit of a push, and fucking his son was just the way to do it. Before that could be done, however, she needed to pull the kid out of his state of embarrassed teen crush. Nara, I'm hungry. I've been to Ichiraku's ramen bar with Naruto before, and I've been to your barbecue restaurant, but I've never been anywhere fancy. Take me somewhere nice. The best place in the village, she demanded. There's this one place Asuma used to go to with Kurenai all the time before. You know, he paused, sighing to himself and attempting to regain his composure. It's called Fleur de la Feuille or something like that. Ino said it means, flower of the leaf, but she's not very good at other languages. Tamari nodded, rolling her eyes slightly at the boy's ramblings. She put on her best fake smile and asked him to lead the way. When they arrived at the location, Tamari was taken aback by the beauty of the establishment. The walls were made of an ancient stonework, while gorgeous wild roses snaked their way up the walls. The windows were tinted to set the atmosphere inside, and candles could be seen on each of the tables. It was a romantic kind of place, and totally not Tamari's style, but she figured it would get what she needed out of Shikamaru. As the pair entered the restaurant, a man in a fancy tux approached with menus. He smiled a fake smile and asked if it was just the two of them. When the pair nodded, he led them towards a small yet cozy table. The chairs were comfortable and cushioned, and the table had a maroon tablecloth with white cloth napkins. The candle in the center of the table was set inside a crystal candle holder that looked beautiful as it glowed a pink hue. When the waiter returned with water, Tamari smiled, before glancing at her menu. He left quickly to allow them some time to mull it over, and the blonde took this as her opportunity to begin the next stage of her plan. Shikamaru, there's a reason I wanted you to take me here, and it isn't to sample the food of Konoha, she began. I like you. I have since the Chunin exams. I want to act on that. The Nara's cheeks flushed slightly, the tops of his ears turning the same color as the tablecloth. He stared down at his empty plate for a moment, before looking back up and gazing at the beautiful blonde across from him. Of course he felt the same way, if not stronger than she ever could have imagined, but his father's words echoed in his head. You are on official business with the liaison of Sanagakure. This is wholly inappropriate, but was it? Just because he was her guide didn't mean he was going to jeopardize her duties. If anything, he would aid her in her missions by getting to know her on a more personal, if not intimate level. She would learn more about him, and as a result, his village. That was why she was here, right? Do you know why I let you win during our match at the Chunin exams? He paused and then chuckled ever so slightly, other than the fact that I was too lazy to fight another match, of course. To fuck with my head, obviously, she lied. No, Tamari, it was because in that fight, I began to see you as someone on my level. You were just as smart as me, and even stronger. That fight changed me, and it took you saving my ass in the forest to realize why. I fell in love with you during that fight. I couldn't let you lose because I knew you would hate me for it. Even thought the exams ended soon after that, I still had to ensure you would consider me an equal too. Tamari smiled, both because her suspicions were confirmed, and her plan was going perfectly. Shikamaru interpreted it as a sign of approval and sighed with relief. You don't think I'm a corny idiot, do you? He asked. Of course not, you idiot. I'm glad you finally told me, even though I've known all along. Why you what? He said a little too loudly, his eyes going wide. Was it that obvious? Yeah, it kind of was. The way you stared at me every time we had to plan the Chunin exams. How you would stare at the ceiling with a blank look on your face, but an obvious blush. It was pretty obvious. Before they could continue the conversation, the waiter returned to take their orders. Tamari ordered something cheap and simple, as did Shikamaru. They chatted a little more throughout the meal, Tamari faking every word with practiced expertise, and Shikamaru opening up just as she planned. It was only a matter of time before phase 2 of her plan was complete, and soon after, she would have full success. Part of her felt guilty, but the other part felt triumph. Shikaku was worth 10 of his son, and she could care less about his feelings. He always had the dumb dits of a teammate to fuck when Tamari ditched him. After dinner, Tamari forced herself to walk hand in hand with the boy, despite her hatred of such cutsy practices. It made her feel childish and weak, but she had to keep up her mask of lovey-doveyness. When they returned to his apartment, Tamari began to move toward the back of the house where she knew his bedroom was located. Judging from the layout of the entire house, she knew the master bedroom of his parents' part of the house was close to Shikamaru's. She only hoped that it was right next door. Shikamaru followed the blonde into his room, wondering why she was in there when her guest room was down the hall. Obviously he didn't catch on to what she was doing. He was so blind to these types of things, even if he was known for his intelligence. Tamari turned to face him, her eyes filled with fake lust. She reached for his hand and placed it on her. He blushed at first, but after a moment of hesitation, he moved closer and began to massage that was beginning to show through the thin material of her kimono. She took his other hand and lead it past the flap of the material, between her fish-netted legs and to her dripping clit. He massaged her firmly through the fishnet, every stroke sending little jolts of pleasure to her toes. To make things easier, Tamari imagined Shikaku's scars and small goatee. He imagined the man's gruff, gravelly voice whispering dirty things into her ear. She immediately became soaked, and Shikamaru noticed. He grinned in triumph before pushing her back slightly. She resisted for a moment, before allowing him to take a slightly dominant role. She didn't like it, but it would help with her plan. As Tamari shifted onto her elbows on his bed, Shikamaru moved on top of her, tugging at her silk obi in an attempt to get it off. After a moment, the material loosened and he pulled it away, revealing the prize beneath the black material of her kimono. Two large, perfectly round mounds lay before him, covered only by thin fishnet which criss-crossed over her flesh, barely holding back the gorging mammaries. Her erect S poked through the spaces in the material, and he took full advantage of this, flicking his fingers over both nubs as once. The blonde arched her back in response, pressing her S harder into his hands, begging for more. Her hands slid all over his body, from his hard stomach to his forearms, then the thighs and buttocks. Before long, she was tugging up his shirt, which he allowed her to remove and toss to the floor in a heap. Below the long-sleeved blue shirt was a fishnet one not much different from her own. Shikamaru shuddered slightly as her fingers ran across the material, touching skin then thread then skin again. The sensation was amazing. The Nara tugged the rest of Tamari's kimono open, revealing the rest of her body. She wore no panties, but only a full-body fishnet suit under the formal clothing. He couldn't help but moan with desire at seeing her soaking wet womanhood, and Tamari knew his erection was probably becoming painful. To relieve him, she unbuttoned his pants, releasing him from his agony. Shikamaru quickly shrugged off his pants, followed by his boxers, which both fell on the floor next to his shirt. The two ninja lay there for a moment, Shikamaru wearing nothing but a fishnet top, and Tamari in her own fishnet suit. They stayed like that for a moment, staring at one another and panting, before Tamari grabbed his cock and slid it inside her. At the same moment he crashed his lips into hers. The threads around her opening tore as his girth slid through the gap with ease. As he entered her, he was surrounded by the tight heat of her cunt so completely that he gasped and shuddered with pleasure. He continued the passionate kiss despite his state of bliss, and after a moment, he pulled away and began to move inside her. He started off with a slow rhythm, before picking up the pace gradually. "Faster, damn it, I want you to pound me until I bleed," she commanded, rocking her hips in time with his in an attempt to speed things up. Shikamaru obeyed, moving twice as fast, and filling her with his full length. The result was immediate, as the blonde writhed under him, arching her back and thrashing her head around in pleasure. She began to moan, her voice becoming louder and louder with each stroke of his manhood. Soon enough, she was practically screaming in pleasure. Shikamaru was too distracted, and his brain too fogged to understand the implications of her voice. Tamari knew exactly what she was doing, however. Shikaku would know exactly what was going on next door. As Shikamaru came close to his climax, Tamari suddenly rotated her hips with a sharp flick, rolling the boy onto his back. She pounced on him like a lion on her prey, before she straddled him and slipped him back inside her. She ground into his pelvis with the same intensity he had been fucking her with, bouncing up and down with her head thrown back in ecstasy. Her tits bounced at a different rhythm from the rest of her body, moving as if they had their own laws of physics. It was only a few more moments before Tamari gripped the young Nara's upper arm tightly and cried out one last time as she came. Her insides twitched and trembled violently, pushing Shikamaru over the edge as well. He came violently, deep within her. She didn't care in the slightest as she collapsed onto his sweat-coated chest. Soon enough it would be Shikaku inside of her, and that was all she needed to think about. Shikaku lay in his bed, listening to the banging on the wall from the room next to his son's room. As her voice began to ring out in moans of pleasure, he knew exactly what was happening and why. She was fucking his son to get to him. Yoshino lay fast asleep beside him, not stirring from the noise in the slightest. He sighed and wished he could do the same, but to no avail. The scarred ninja could do nothing but listen as his son picked up the pace, fucking the woman Shikaku couldn't stop thinking about. As he listened, his mind put him in that room, in the place of Shikamaru. He imagined himself pounding her hard and fast, his muscles straining to keep up the pace and his cock near bursting from her heat. He reached under his thin blanket, slipping a hand under the waistband of his shorts until it rested on his rock-hard erection. He stroked it gently at first, before gripping it tightly with his hand and simulating the scene he so badly wanted to be involved in. As he heard her voice cry out in one final shout of pleasure, he, too, gave a slight moan before he came to his own climax, shooting string after string of hot semen into his shorts. As he recovered, gasping and shuddering from the aftershocks of pleasure, he glanced over at his wife. She was still sound asleep, without a change in her position at all. If only he could do the same. The sun rose promptly at 7:35 a.m. and Shikaku sighed, rubbing his red and burning eyes against the unwelcome light. He had heard every sound from the other room, and there were plenty. The pair had been at it for hours, only taking a few moments in between bouts to get their breath back. The older man couldn't even consider sleeping with the amount of noise they were making. He was surprised that Yoshino slept so soundly next to him. With the sun up now, Shikaku had no chance of catching a wink before his wife awoke and forced him out like she did every morning. Today was going to be a long day. The dark man started the day normally, nonetheless. He showered, taking a little longer than usual to try to get his thoughts straight. The scalding water helped at first, but then it just reminded Shikaku of her undeniably delicious heat. Just as he was starting to slip back into his fantasies, he quickly wrenched on the tap to set the water to its coldest setting. With the sudden extreme change in temperature, the bearded man almost yelled out, but bit his tongue to suppress the urge. Once finished with his shower, Shikaku shaved, tied his unruly hair back and stared at his reflection in the misty mirror for several moments. His eyes were bloodshot, with large dark bags under them. He pulled on the skin and it slapped back into place, bouncing slightly. He sighed, his eyes flicking for the briefest moment towards his claw-like facial scars, and then down to his chest, where he could see the fresher scars of his previous mission. Those scars were similar to the ones on his face, but much more brutal. There were 3 separate sets of scars, each with 3 perfectly uniform lines like cat scratches. Each line was an inch apart. One went from his right shoulder down to the middle of his toned stomach. The next crossed over the first, going from right under his left down to his right hip. The third was a short but deep one on his left shoulder, starting from the top of the shoulder blade and stopping at his collarbone. All 3 sets were bright pink and puckered, but healing well. He ran a single finger over the longest line, the center gash from the shoulder to stomach scar. His mind was back at the desert oasis, watching his blonde angel arched back with her golden locks swirling around her head and her full, round S almost floating on the surface of the crystal clear water. Just as he felt himself start to get firm once again, he pressed a finger into the bottom of his scar and grimaced against the pain of the action. He had to get her out of his head. Shikaku dressed quickly, sliding into his dark pants, his fishnet tee slipping over his head without thought and his crisp Junin jacket sliding over his shoulders effortlessly. He glanced at himself one more time in the mirror before he exited the steamy bathroom. As soon as he stepped out, he nearly ran into an impatient-looking Yoshino, who was tapping her foot on the hardwood floor, her dark hair tied into a tight bun on her head. "I've had your breakfast ready for almost half an hour now. What took you so long? It's probably cold by now." Shikaku grimaced before averting his eyes and heading towards the kitchen to eat his breakfast. "You ungrateful pig, I put all that work into your food and you don't even apologize for taking so long? Maybe tomorrow I won't make you breakfast at all. Or dinner, or lunch. You would starve before the day was through." He ignored her, reading the morning paper instead while he sipped his coffee and munched on a piece of toast with butter. She was like this every morning, even if he didn't take longer than usual in the shower. He just nodded his head as she spoke, hoping she would get the hint and go away. He didn't look at her. Is there a reason you are being so quiet? You haven't even looked at my face all morning. He ignored her again. Nara Shikaku. You're ignoring me. I'm sorry, love. I didn't sleep well last night. Forgive me? He finished his toast quickly, before standing and looking deep into the dark eyes of his longtime wife. What he saw there was a deep longing. She wanted so much from him. Her eyes were so caring and loving and devoted. His stomach flipped uncomfortably and he groaned before looking away. He heard his wife sigh in disappointment as he turned from her and walked out the door. As he was leaving, Shikaku glanced to the left, towards his son's portion of the complex. Just as he was exiting, so were Shikamaru and Tamari. Both were glowing, with grins on their faces. As Tamari caught his eye, her grin spread wider into that of a predator. She knew the effect she had on him last night. She could see the evidence in the bags under his eyes and the grumpy look on his face. She knew she made him miserable and she loved every damn second of it. This was a game to her. He was a challenge to overcome. She was playing with him. When Shikamaru looked over to see what Tamari was looking at, he smiled as well, before walking over to his father. Hey Dad, headed over to see Tsunade? I'm taking Tamari-san to her meeting this morning. Are you okay, Dad? You look tired, Shikamaru asked, seeming genuinely concerned. I'll be fine. Just a long night doing some work for the Hokage. Nothing out of the usual. He paused. You best be getting your liaison to her meeting before she is late. Oh right. See you Dad. With that, the pair took off at a brisk walk. Shikaku sighed, having avoided an awkward bullet. He rubbed the back of his neck to loosen some of the knotted muscles before he took off at a jog. Once his muscles were loose enough, he jumped onto the nearest rooftop and kept going at a faster pace, taking the ninja highway to his destination. This was one thing he could do without thinking of that damned woman. Running kept his mind clear and his heart beating. He could run for hours and not even notice. Unfortunately, this run came to an end far too quickly as he reached the Hokage Tower. With a deep, lengthy sigh, the old Nara entered the building to begin his work for the day, hoping to whatever god was out there that there was enough work to keep his mind occupied. The day had gone better than he ever thought it could under the circumstances. Tsunade had more work for him than he thought ever possible. They were tracking the movements of a criminal group known as the Horsemen, and Shikaku had to study each of their statistic cards in great detail and create a plan of action. It was complicated and difficult work, keeping his mind occupied for the majority of the day. He was relieved and in a good mood at last. As every day went, Shikaku was meeting his two best friends for a drink after work. Shuza and Inoichi would be there already, since he left about half an hour later than usual. He rushed over to his favorite bar, and located his friends at the typical table. They were already into the sake, not waiting up for him, who was notoriously late to their meetings. Ino, Cho, he shouted in greeting. Shika, they shouted back, grinning like kids. Shikaku sat next to Inoichi, not wanting to infringe on the small amount of room Shuza had left in his booth. He immediately poured himself a shot of sake before downing it in one gulp. He grinned at each of his friends, before pouring another and downing it as well. He wanted to have a great time tonight, and nothing was going to stop him from that. Or that was his intention, until someone walked through the door of the bar. She was wearing a tight lavender tank top, her S practically popping out of the top. Her navel was showing with the top riding up. Hanging low on her hips was a short black miniskirt, its pleats swaying as she walked. She also wore thigh-high black fishnets and an amazing pair of black heels that shaped her legs perfectly. Her hair was let down for the first time he had ever seen outside of the oasis. It flowed around her face and shone as if she took very good care of it. Shikaku's eyes followed her pointedly, studying every curve and over succulent piece of exposed skin. He drank in her appearance so fully that he didn't even notice his son trailing behind her in his own casual outfit. The pair headed to the bar and took their own drinks, before moving to the slightly populated dance floor. He watched with bated breath as she positioned herself in the perfect way for him to see the sway of her hips, and she danced to the throbbing music. He watched as her skirt swayed, revealing the slightest curve where her leg met her buttocks. It was only when Shuza waved a hand in front of his face that Shikaku snapped out of his enthrallment. He shook his head to clear the images from his mind, before turning back to his friends. There was a clear blush on his cheeks. "You okay, Shika? Lacking sleep is pretty much it. How about another round?" Shikaku poured each of his friends a shot of sake, and then poured himself one, downed it, then poured another to sip on. He couldn't help but glance at the dance floor every few moments, but his friends didn't seem to notice. They talked and sang like they usually did at their favorite bar, but Shikaku drank considerably more than he typically did. By the time his son left the bar to turn in for the night, he had a mission the next day. Shikaku was quite drunk. He watched while his friends were too distracted by their song to notice. Tamari, who hadn't had more than 1 or 2 drinks, skipped coyly towards the door of the bar, glancing back to catch Shikaku's eye as she went. As impaired as he was, the Nara didn't even hesitate. He stood, swaying slightly, and followed her out the door. He said nothing to his friends, who didn't even notice him leave. As he exited the bar, Shikaku looked left and right down the empty street. He saw nobody, not even the woman he sought. He let out a disappointed sigh before beginning his long walk home. As he passed an alleyway, his peripheral vision picked up slight movement. He turned his head to see the woman he was looking for leaning seductively against the brick wall of the building next to the bar. She was standing halfway in shadow, but it was unmistakably her. His stomach tightened painfully and he felt heat course through his body as he looked her up and down. How had he ever resisted her in the first place? Moving as if he was being controlled by one of Suna's famous puppeteers, Shikaku entered the alleyway, following his prey deeper into the shadows until they came to the end of the alley, where there was a short brick wall. When she turned around, Shikaku growled hungrily before striking. He grabbed the blonde woman's shoulders roughly, before slamming her back into the brick wall of the building next to the bar. He moved up to her quickly, pressing a knee between her legs firmly. He felt her grind against the hard flesh of his thigh. She wanted him, bad. Shikaku buried his nose in Tamari's neck, trailing his tongue along the edge of her neck and shoulder before biting down on the flesh roughly. She let out a slight cry of pain, but there was pleasure laced in the sound. He growled into her neck, dragging his hand along her toned stomach, underneath the fabric, to her bulging S. He squeezed one slightly, flicking the hardened with his dexterous thumb. She gasped in response, begging him for more. He ground his knee between her legs once more, before lowering it. His leg was immediately replaced with a hand, which went under her skirt, tracing its way up her thigh. She wasn't wearing panties. He grinned slightly and slipped his fingers between the soaked lips of her womanhood. He quickly slipped them out, before finding the swollen nub above. He rubbed in small circles, eliciting a deep-throated moan from her. It didn't take long before he couldn't handle the teasing anymore. He was rock-hard and desperate. Despite their awkward location, Shikaku tugged his pants down slightly, positioned himself at her entrance, before plunging himself deep inside her. She gasped and tossed her head back in bliss, wrapping a leg around his thigh to grant him better depth. With a grunt, Shikaku lifted the woman, hooking his arms behind her knees. She wrapped the other leg around him, pulling him closer as he rotated his hips to better position himself. He quickly moved to sit on the short brick wall at the end of the alley, Tamari on his lap seductively with her skirt bunched up at her waist. Shikaku leaned back slightly, reaching his hands around her waist to grip her full, round ass tightly with his hands. In moments, she was lifting herself up and down on his lap. The pleasure coursing through his body, though muted by the alcohol, was intense. Wave upon wave went through him with each thrust inside her hot wetness. Her quiet, yet powerful moans were driving him nuts. He could hardly contain himself. Within moments, Shikaku was thrusting into her as hard and fast as he could. He was losing himself inside her. He tore her out of the top of her shirt, cupping it roughly with his left hand and taking the mound into his mouth. He suckled, nibbled and licked her ass roughly as he continued to pound her over and over again. He threw his head back in ecstasy, shouting out louder than he had intended as he came deep inside the blonde bouncing on his lap. At the same moment, she arched her back and came as well, her entire body stiffening as waves of pleasure racked through her. As he was recovering, Shikaku sighed with contentment, a small smile on his face. It was only after he glanced over Tamari's shoulder that the man's happiness was cut short. At the end of the alleyway, wide-eyed and horrified, were Inoichi and Shuza, staring at the scene before them. The Nara moved as if he were in a dream. He pulled out of Tamari, pushing her to the side as he tucked himself back into his pants. He ignored her as she flattened the pleats of her skirt. He walked forward, towards his friends, his eyes downcast. He knew what they would be thinking. Yoshino. Shush. Shikaku. Inoichi asked tentatively as he glanced towards his larger friend for support. Getting some fresh air? HN. Responded the Nara blankly. Shika. What about yo? We've had a lot to drink tonight. Shuza. How about we take Shikaku-kun home and forget about tonight? It's not like we're kids anymore. Right? Inoichi interrupted Shuza, cutting off the dangerous statement he was about to make. But, we can't just. Shuza trailed off, glancing from the blonde in the alleyway and back to his dark-haired friend. Come on, we're going. Inoichi commanded, dragging his two friends along as he went. Shikaku couldn't even glance back at Tamari as he left, following his friends blindly, his eyes focusing on the toes of his shoes. He was numb, not a single emotion running through his body but that of deep, unending shame. He let the animal side of him take over, and the results were catastrophic. Yoshino would find out now, and he would have nothing. He would be left with nothing. It was over. As his friends returned him to his home, Shikaku detachedly walked through his house before sinking onto the sofa rather than sleep next to his wife in his own bed. He couldn't bear to look at her tonight. The next day, Shuza, you can't. Just forget about it. We were all a little too drunk last night and we imagined it. Nothing happened. Shikaku's fine. Everything's fine. Nothing happened. Inoichi was trying his hardest to get his best friend to drop the accusations, but nothing seemed to shake the determined man. I can't just let this happen with Yoshino not knowing. She has to know. Shikaku fucked another woman, Inoichi. This is important. You can't ruin your best friend's life just because your stupid fucking morals tell you to. Let Shika work this out himself. He's a smart man. You know that. Obviously not smart enough to keep his in his pants. You've known this man your whole life. How can you talk about him like that? I didn't think he would ever sink this low. I always thought he was a good man. He still is. Nothing happened. Inoichi shouted, growling in frustration at his large friend. Shuza glared at his blonde companion, setting his jaw and crossing his arms over his chest in defiance. The debate was a stalemate, with Inoichi wishing to ignore the event completely, and Shuza refusing to allow Shikaku's actions to go on without repercussions. The big man fumed to himself, furious that Inoichi would not do the right thing. He couldn't let Shikaku hurt his wife for the strumpet named Sabaku no Tamari, even if she was the Casecage's sister. With his heart in the right place, Shuza decided then and there what he would do. Without Inoichi, he would go to Yoshino and tell her what he saw. She needed to know and she would. Today, Shuza shifted uncomfortably in his best friend's living room. Shikaku had left hours ago to perform his daily duties for the Hokage, giving the large man the perfect opportunity to approach poor Yoshino. He had come over under the pretense of wanting to catch up with the wife of his friend, and Yoshino played the perfect hostess, pouring tea and even going so far as to whip up a snack worthy of an akamichi. Shuza munched nervously, trying to work up the guts to broach the topic he needed to. It was hard looking into the eyes and accepting the perfect kindness of a woman, only to crush her with this sort of news. Shuza took a deep breath as Yoshino sat across from him at her kitchen table, steeling himself for what was about to come. Yoshino, I've known your husband since I was a young boy. I've been his best friend, his comrade, and for a very long time, I've been his conscience like he has been my brain, Shuza began. That's why I have come to see you today, because as his conscience, I cannot ignore this. What do you mean, Shuza? Is Shikaku alright? Is he in trouble? Her innocence to the matter disturbed Shuza, but it only hardened his resolve that much more. No, Yoshino, not like that. Well, it's really difficult to tell you, so I'll just go right out and say it. Your husband is having an affair. He has been since he went missing in the desert. I think it changed him when he nearly died, but he won't go into detail about what happened during those weeks. He paused, taking a deep breath. Inoichi and I caught him with Sabaku no Tamari last night in an alleyway. The Casecage's sister. I'm not sure what was going through his head, considering his son's interest in the girl, but I swear to you, Yoshino, we caught them in the act. The woman's face had changed from the happy host to a blank, stone-cold stare. There was no emotion on her face. Nothing showed through the mask she held to conceal her true thoughts. Chao's mouth opened and closed several times as he waited for the dark-haired housewife to respond. To say something, anything. Yoshino, I'm here for you if you need to talk it out. Get out. What? I said get out. Now. Shusa stood, thoroughly befuddled, and began moving towards the door. Yoshino remained seated, her face stony as it had been since the news hit her. He watched her for a moment as he moved, and deep in his gut, he felt he had done the wrong thing. Trying to hold in his emotions as well as the woman in front of him, Shusa turned to leave the home of his best friend, only to hit a brick wall. At least, it felt like a brick wall at first, but then revealed to be softer underneath. Actually, it wasn't a brick wall or anything close to one. It was a man, a very unfortunate man named Nara Shikaku. The dark-haired man stared at Shusa with a stare that could turn bones to jelly. The large man stared back, his gaze more shaky and terrified than his friend's. The two of them needn't have known each other for years to see the words behind those expressions. Shusa leaked guilt out of every pore and Shikaku bled betrayal. The Nara pushed past his old friend roughly, bumping shoulders with him before moving through the doorway to his home. Shusa stared ahead the entire time, unmoving for several moments as his guts knotted over and over again. He had just ruined his best friend's marriage, his entire life. Yoshino would never forgive the man. How could she? Shikaku would be kicked out, and he would be left penniless with no home and no family. He would lose everything, and it was all because Shusa couldn't keep his big fat mouth shut. The moment the news had hit her, Nara Yoshino went cold. Her guts felt like a rock had been dropped into them, a heavy one. She barely breathed. She barely thought. She barely even felt her heart beating and her blood pumping. She felt almost robotic, with no emotions, and no ability to control her own actions or thoughts. Her limbs felt stiff and metallic, as if her joints needed oil. It was an odd sensation to say the least. One would think that a woman finding out her husband was a cheater would lead to her bursting into tears, or throwing a tantrum, or maybe even breaking out into action. On the contrary, Yoshino could do absolutely nothing, could feel absolutely nothing. After Shusa left, it was only moments before the subject of her emptiness strode through the front door, his face a blank mask that the woman knew all too well as his ninja face. He had trained for years to perfect that expressionless void, and he had it fixed so tight that nothing would leak through. Yoshino knew, however, that the only time he used this mask was when he truly felt deep emotions which required concealment. The dark-haired housewife remained motionless, barely even glancing at her husband before returning to her nearly blank stare. It was several moments before she noticed that Shikaku had taken the seat across from her which Shusa had occupied. There was a slight pink tinge to his cheeks, which the woman recognized immediately. He had likely been at the bar for quite some time before returning home to face her. Her jaw twitched in annoyance as she wondered to herself. Had he been having affairs before his disappearance? Surely his best friends would have known about them then, wouldn't they? Was his drunkenness a cover for his guilt? Yoshi, dear, Shikaku began, only to trail off as he saw his wife's eyes flash at the pet name he used. He looked down at the table, seemingly admiring the surface while trying to think of what to say. Yoshino spoke before his genius mind could come up with something. Nothing you can say now will change what you've done. She paused to take a breath, her mind finally working as her words began to flow. You have betrayed your vows to me, betrayed your son, and betrayed your own honor as a man. You have created a black mark on the Nara name, and you have destroyed this family. Her voice remained calm and empty as she spoke to him. I ended my career as a kunoichi of Konohagakure to run this house and raise our son. I gave up everyone I loved to marry you, and I did it because I loved you. I still love you, and I still wouldn't change any moment of our lives together. Yoshi, No, you are not allowed to speak until I have finished. You do not deserve to speak until I say what needs to be said. Her words were harsh, but the man knew he deserved them. Regardless of my feelings about our lives together, it is my future which I must decide upon. I had to decide whether your actions can be forgiven with time, or whether you can even be trusted anymore. This woman you had last night, her name is Sabaku no Tamari, is it not? If I remember correctly, our son has been interested in that girl since his Chunin exams many years ago. Yes, Shikaku stated softly, answering both questions. So it is not only my trust you have broken, but your son's as well. The question that must be asked, then, is whether the two of us can ever trust you again, which leads to my first real question to you. Do you love her? Yoshino's face showed its first real emotion when speaking of her son, who would be crushed when he found out the news. Shikaku lifted his eyes to look at his wife, his gaze becoming more boyish than she had seen him in a very long time. He took several moments of deep thought, his eyebrows knitting together and his fingers fiddling before he dared speak. For this woman, I feel a very strong attraction. I cannot say it is love, for it is a very different feeling than I feel towards you, as my wife and the mother of my son. What I feel towards her can only be described as insatiable lust. He stopped, looking down at the table once more, before continuing, I think you deserve to hear the whole story of what happened when I went missing in the desert. And he explained every detail of the events of his mission, from the moment his enemy appeared, his defeat, the time fading in and out of consciousness before awakening at the desert oasis. He explained his thoughts about the blonde Kunoichi upon waking to see her bathing, having truly believed he had died and been rewarded for his life as a ninja. He told the entire truth, including his late-night urge as he heard his son and Tamari together in the next room, and even his inability to control himself as he watched the woman sway on the dance floor the night before. Absolutely no detail was left out, and at the same time, none of the details were defended with excuses to sway Yoshino in any direction. She needed to know the truth if she was going to make this kind of decision, and he would do nothing to jeopardize her trust again. Yoshino listened to the whole story, and as she did, her stomach became heavier and heavier. His attraction to this woman was on an extreme level. It was so irresistible that he risked everything just to have her again. He had tried to fend her off, but every attempt was in vain. He had suffered since he returned to Konoha. He had wished for this woman and hated himself for it. Despite his feelings, however, he still failed to follow through with them and ended up fucking her anyway. What was to say it would not happen again with a little nudge from the strumpet? How could she trust that his will would not crumble again and again? Did he deserve another chance to crush her heart simply because he could not resist his angel of the desert? And what of Shikamaru? He would have to be told. He would have to live with the knowledge that his father stole the one person he had ever truly loved. She was all the boy could talk about after the Chunin exams, and any time they worked together, his mood seemed to practically sparkle for days after she left. How could she possibly allow the man who took that joy away from him to go on unpunished? But he was sorry, was he not? He had explained everything, and he did try to resist her. Perhaps the woman, perhaps Sabaku no Tamari was to blame. Sure, she saved Shikaku's life in the desert that day, but she had also given in to the man's every whim, and even went so far as to tempt him into submission. But how could she continue with Shikaku when Tamari was still out there, with the same urges and feelings for the man? Would she return to tempt him again? Would he be able to resist her when she did? All these things ran through Yoshino's mind as she considered her choice. She remained silent after the story was finished, her hands folded in front of her, her chin resting upon them as she thought. Everything led to the same place. Sure, Tamari was mostly to blame, but her husband's weak will was and likely always would be a problem. The conclusion was an obvious one to her. Nara Shikaku would have to go, for he was no longer welcome in the home Yoshino had built, and was no longer welcome in her life. I'm sorry, Shikaku. I've listened, and I've considered everything you have told me. I have thought of all the possibilities, but there is no way I can let this continue. As long as that strumpet can still come to Konoha, you are going to be on her radar. And I cannot trust your will to hold the next time, since it obviously couldn't hold this long. She paused for a breath, not wanting to say it, but needing to. I can't do this anymore. You need to get out. Collect your things and find somewhere else to stay while I figure out the finer details. Stay with Inoichi or in a hotel. I don't care where, just leave and don't come back. When the news was given to Shikamaru, he had just spent the entire day fetching things for Tamari and was finally relaxing while she worked. When his mother's words hit him, it was as if he had lost his father all over again. His guts went rock solid, not unlike his mother's. The young man's own father had, knowing how his son felt, dipped into his first and only, what? Girlfriend? Lover? Object of his affections? Shikamaru didn't know what he and Tamari could be called. He had feelings for her since the end of their battle in the Chunin exams, and since that day, he had thought about her more frequently than not. When he finally thought they were going to get together, and everything was going just as he wanted, this had to happen. His father fucked a woman half his age. But what about Tamari? They had been together off and on since the other night, and had even slept together that very day. Had she been thinking about his father while they Okami? No. She couldn't do that kind of thing. She wasn't like that, was she? No, it was probably his father who initiated the entire thing. He was always drinking alcohol with Inoichi and Shuza. Shikamaru had accompanied his father when he reached manhood, or what would constitute manhood in a ninja's life. And the older Nara was not shy when it came to flirting with women while under the influence. It wasn't even that surprising that he found Tamari attractive. Him and his father were so alike sometimes that it was almost scary. Besides, she was beautiful and damn near irresistible. But how could his father go after her so openly? He had never had an affair before, as far as Shikamaru knew, and in his experience at the bar with his father, he didn't seem all too serious when he flirted. What was it about Tamari that made the man forget about his own son and wife in exchange for a little bit of fun with a foreign kunoichi? As Yoshino explained the entire series of events, minus some of the more detailed descriptions, just as her husband had, Shikamaru got a clear picture of what had happened. It was less his father's fault and more Tamari's. The cold, hard feeling in his chest and stomach began to morph into something more sinister, something more heated and monstrous. Shikamaru was not an emotional person, but when he felt something, he felt it strong and hard. Tamari had seduced Shikamaru's father, and she had done so while also manipulating Shikamaru himself. The boy ground his teeth together in an attempt to contain his hurt and his fury. Tamari, the woman he had loved since he was nearly 13, had only slept with him to get to his father. She had used him as a tool to tease Shikaku into giving in. She used him as an excuse to get close. She had done the worst possible thing she could do to the young Nara, and he was crushed. Shikamaru stood suddenly as his mother finished telling him what she was going to do. He was no longer listening anyway. All he could think about was the painful things he wanted to do to this woman. He would have done anything for her. He had welcomed her into his home, had gone out of his way to help her find things she needed around the village. He had even shared his bed with her. She took all of those things without even batting an eyelash. She had acted as if she cared for him while all she cared about was Shikaku. It made him sick to his stomach just thinking about it. She had with his father before they had even considered it. She had with him again the very next night, only to return to Shikamaru's bed when they were finished. What kind of fucked up woman could do something so heartless and so cruel? Only a woman from Sanagakure who knew nothing but evil until she came to Konoha. But Shikamaru felt no pity for her. She had changed since she entered the Chunin exams. There was no excuse for her absolute lack of empathy and completely selfish motivations. It didn't matter what her past was. Everything she had done was terribly, terribly wrong. Shikamaru walked to his door without a word and left his apartment with his mother still sitting at his kitchen table, merely watching him with sadness in her eyes. He was going to go to Tamari's meeting with the daimyo and call her out on this charade once and for all. Teaser from Chapter 6. To hell with it. You manipulated me and you did it to get to my father. Do you even care that he is twice your age? Does it matter that he's married, or is adultery not a thing over in the desert? Shikamaru asked, not expecting her to answer any of these questions, but simply wanting her to hear him. He explained everything, you know. He told us how you manipulated him in the desert. He told us how you came to Konoha just to bait him. He told us that you were the one who dragged him down, you goddamn evil bitch. How could you? Is it because I embarrassed you in the Chunin exams? Is this revenge? I don't get it because I never thought you were this kind of person in all the years I have been working for you. What the fuck? It didn't seem like she was really listening at all. She had this look in her eyes as if she were locked inside her mind, and her lips were spread into a cat-like grin. The Nara shook his head in disbelief before speaking again. Are you even listening to a word I'm saying? This isn't a game. You can't just fuck with people's lives and not expect consequences. Tamari's eyes refocused and she seemed to snap back to reality, but her grin remained in place. Oh, I was listening to it. I just don't care. Did you know I fucked your father in this alley? Actually, it was just over there, about a meter behind you against that wall. She pointed to the place and began to move past him to get closer to it. I wonder if I can still see the stain of his seed from when it spilled out of. Slap. Her meeting went longer than usual today. She was meant to be out of the conference room by 6 p.m. at the latest, but the young Nara was waiting for 2 hours, his legs cramping as he crouched next to the doorway to the daimyo's offices. When the door finally clattered open and he saw her, his stomach lurched in agony and his blood ran cold. This was the woman he had thought about for years. This was the woman he had imagined himself with time and again. This was the woman he invited into his home, into his bed and his arms. He would have given her anything and everything she wanted, but she didn't want him. She wanted an old man, scarred alcoholic. Why? Shikamaru shook his head to clear it of this depressing train of thought. He studied Tamari's face quickly, noting her clear annoyance and exhaustion. Despite these signs, he approached her immediately and took her upper arm forcefully. "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing, Shika? Come with me, we need to talk. Now, can't you see I'm exhausted? That meeting was ridiculous and those damn bastards know it. They shouldn't have such huge EG. Be quiet and come with me. Now." Tamari didn't protest anymore. Hearing the acidic tone of Shikamaru's voice told her he was pissed, and pissed was interesting. The junior Nara rarely showed any emotion other than boredom and slight inquisitiveness. Anger was something she had never seen. She followed him down the street for a moment, and then onto the rooftops for ease of travel. They leapt for a few moments until the Nara seemed to settle on a location, then they hopped down quickly. Shikamaru chose the location because it was dark, and the loud music of the bar next door would drown out their conversation from anyone who may walk by the alley. What he didn't know, however, was that Tamari had been here before. It was quite recent, actually. The short brick wall to one side made the blonde grin and bite her lip from the memories. This very alley was the same place she achieved victory over her prey. Her inner thighs became uncomfortably moist as she remembered every detail of her experience in this alley, and Tamari tried her damnedest to resist the urge to squirm. Shikamaru seemed to ignore her for the most part, looking down at the ground as if it was the most interesting scientific discovery in history. Tamari waited impatiently for the boy to say what he needed to say. She figured she knew what was coming anyway. There was no way the fat man would keep his mouth shut for long. "Well, why did you bring me here? It's kind of creepy, unless you want it to be kinky, because that might actually be interesting. Would you shut up already? I can't stand the fact that all you can say always leads to the same topic. Is that all you're worth?" Tamari gaped at him for a moment, before laughing deep in her chest. "Believe me, kid, I'm worth a lot more than you know. Is fun, especially when it's done with skill." Shikamaru didn't respond to her bait, but ignored her statement altogether. He was working up to what he needed to say. His fists were balled and his arms were rigid with tension. He stared at the ground for a few more moments to work up the courage before finally looking up at the woman he once saw a future with. "You manipulated me and you did it to get to my father. Do you even care that he is twice your age? Does it matter that he's married, or is adultery not a thing over in the desert?" Shikamaru asked, not expecting her to answer any of these questions, but simply wanting her to hear him. "He explained everything, you know. He told us how you manipulated him in the desert. He told us how you came to Konoha just to bait him. He told us that you were the one who dragged him down, you goddamn evil bitch. How could you? Is it because I embarrassed you in the Chunin exams? Is this revenge? I don't get it because I never thought you were this kind of person in all the years I have been working with you. What the fuck?" Shikamaru resisted the pressure building in his eyes as he spoke, holding back the tears that were trying to force themselves out. He would not be the crybaby she ridiculed in the past. He would be angry. He held on to that feeling of barely bottled rage and clung to it like a life raft. That was when he noticed her expression. It didn't seem like she was really listening at all. She had this look in her eyes as if she were locked inside her mind, and her lips were spread into a cat-like grin. The Nara shook his head in disbelief before speaking again. "Are you even listening to a word I'm saying? This isn't a game. You can't just fuck with people's lives and not expect consequences." Tamari's eyes refocused and she seemed to snap back to reality, but her grin remained in place. "Oh, I was listening to it. I just don't care. Did you know I fucked your father in this alley? Actually, it was just over there, about a meter behind you against that wall." She pointed to the place and began to move past him to get closer to it. "I wonder if I can still see the stain of his seed from when it spilled out of." Slap. Tamari gasped, an intense stinging pain radiated from her cheek. She gaped once more at the boy, surprised at his forwardness, and also disappointed by his girlishness. What kind of guy slaps someone out of revulsion? He was like a woman from an old movie who just had her butt touched by a stranger. It was seriously pathetic. Tamari couldn't help but let her amusement tumble out in a huge bout of laughter. She held her cheek in an attempt to reduce the stinging of the flesh, but bent over from the laughter all the same. When the laughter began to slow, she stood upright once again and looked back at the young Nara. What she saw brought back flashes from the past. There were tears in his eyes. "I loved you, you know? I really did." Tamari's smile fell away like a discarded tissue. Her stomach tightened ever so slightly as a wave of guilt washed over her. She knew the junior Nara had liked her. It was obvious in the way he lit up when they worked together, but she never realized it had gone this far. "I would have gone through hell for you. I would have done anything you ever wanted, but this. I can't love you after this. You're not the person I thought I knew. You're not the kind of fire I want in my life. You're a cancer, a fucking demon from hell. Call me an idiot and a crybaby all you want. At least I'm not a goddamn homewrecker." "Homewrecker, How's that?" she asked, smugly. "Consequences, Tamari. He won't be coming back. I hope you're happy about that." Tamari didn't respond, but withdrew into herself once more, contemplating the possibilities that were before her now. "Ethics and politics be damned, if we cross paths again, Tamari, you better be careful. It won't be just a slap next time." With his final promise, Nara Shikamaru disappeared out the end of the alleyway and up onto the rooftops. Tamari barely registered his departure as she began to plan her next move towards the endgame. Shikaku had nowhere else to go. He had packed up the few things he would need quite quickly, and was gone in a matter of hours. All he grabbed were a pile of clothes and some of his ninja equipment. He didn't need to take anything else from the woman. He had taken enough already. He didn't take much time to think about where he would go once he was finished packing, but now that he had left, this was really the only place he would be welcomed. The only place he could possibly show his face with no money. "Inoichi, I know this is sudden, but do you think? Do you?" He couldn't finish his sentence before the sense of overwhelming agony ripped through him. It wasn't pain in the physical sense. He had felt plenty of that in the past few months. It was wave upon wave of emotion. He hadn't felt this helpless in a long time. Not even his battle with the missing nin in the desert could compare to how he felt right now. Shikaku wasn't the kind of man to let his emotions get the best of him, but standing there, in front of his best friend, with nothing left in his life. He couldn't hold it together anymore. Inoichi didn't need to hear anymore. He reached out to steady his friend as the man nearly collapsed. He ignored the tears that coursed from his already reddened eyes and took hold of the box the man had nearly dropped. With man and box secured, he escorted both into his family home and onto a soft sofa with a floral pattern. He lowered Shikaku to the cushions gently before placing his box on the floor in front of his feet. Inoichi sat across from him in a similarly flowered armchair and leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees. His long golden hair draped over his shoulder delicately. The blonde allowed Shikaku the necessary time to get out his emotions. He knew his friend wouldn't want to say anything until he was completely under control, and it was bad enough that he had lost control in front of anyone to begin with. As close as they were, and as long as they had known each other, Shikaku did not cry often. Heck, he didn't show more than a quick grin most of the time, even when coerced by alcohol. When he seemed ready, Inoichi spoke, his voice soft and gentle. "Shika, Cho told me what he did. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him. I told him to let it go, but you know what he's like. Once he gets an idea in his head, he can't seem to get it out." The Nara groaned audibly, but said nothing. "I assume Yoshi kicked you out?" the blonde asked gently, his voice soft and quiet. Shikaku merely looked up, his red eyes stone cold. He didn't respond. "Of course you're welcome to stay here. I wouldn't let my best friend live on the streets." The blonde broke into a wide grin, attempting to relieve some of the pressure of the situation. "Heck, it'll be just like our time as genin again. Maybe we can sneak into old Roji-sensei's place and break into his stash of good sake. It'll be like old times." The dark-haired Junin merely stared at his friend with dead eyes, refusing to so much as acknowledge his attempt at kindness. He just didn't have the energy to feel anything at the moment. The emptiness in his core was too achingly obvious for him to think about anything else. He was about to get up and find his way to a bathroom when he heard the front door open. "Ichi-kun, I'm home." A light, feminine voice called out and the sound of paper crumpling could be heard behind the Nara. Come help me with the groceries, you lazy lump. Inoichi jumped up immediately and raced to his wife's side, grasping the heavy bags and taking them from her arms. She smiled and pinched his cheek lovingly before moving further into the living room. Her husband brought the bags to the kitchen, but didn't pack them away, he merely returned to his friend. Unfortunately, with one look at her guest, an expression of fury overcame Mrs. Yamanaka, and she began to tremble with rage. She whipped her head around to glare at her husband, before turning back to the Nara. How dare you come here after what you did to poor Yoshino-san? Her voice was shrill. I don't want you anywhere near my home or my family, lest your actions affect us too. Come now, darling, don't be so hard on H, Inoichi began, but his wife cut him off with a death glare. Don't you defend him. If you ever did something like that to me, I wouldn't let you off as easily as Yoshino-san. Your balls would become a prized trophy to mount on my wall. She turned back to Shikaku. Get out of my house, now. Shikaku nodded his head, his eyes downcast, and grabbed the box of things by his feet. He stole a glance at his one and only friend left in the world, and Inoichi gave him an apologetic look. He wouldn't disobey his wife, not after the threat she just made to his manhood. With no lifeline left, Shikaku turned and left, closing the door gently as he did. He had nobody now. He was stranded, buried just like before, but under emotion and guilt rather than sand. Unfortunately, this time he didn't have an angel waiting to save him. This time, he only had a devil named Sabaku no Tamari, and she was his only refuge. Tamari didn't have a meeting this day. Luckily for her, old politicians needed a day off once in a while. Unfortunately, since everything blew up, she found herself lacking any enjoyable company. Sure, there were other people in Konoha whom she was familiar with, but she didn't really like talking to any of them. The girls were annoying little flowers and the boys were mostly idiots. Some of the older nin were a little more interesting but unavailable. The village itself lacked much in terms of entertainment. She could train at one of the many training fields, but she didn't want to cause trouble by destroying such a well-maintained tool for Konoha. Tamari decided she would stay in today, maybe order some food to her room and relax. Heck, she might even draw a bath to release some of the tension building in her muscles from sitting at a table for so many hours a day. Well, that was her plan, until she heard a sharp knock at her door. Quirking an eyebrow in curiosity, the blonde swung her legs off the side of her hotel bed. Her mind raced, going through a list of possibilities. First, the most reasonable was that it was hotel staff coming with towels or something of the sort. Typically, though, they would announce themselves as such while they knocked. No, it wasn't the hotel. Then who? No, it couldn't be, could it? That would be too perfect, wouldn't it? She padded over to the door, adjusting her clothing as she went. On her days off, she could wear whatever she wanted, and today it was a pair of light pink short shorts, a tight white tank top and an open-fronted gray cardigan. Her hair was done up as it always was, in 4 symmetrical spiky ponytails, with her bangs framing her face. The blonde peeked through the peephole briefly and affirmed her suspicions. It was indeed Nara Shikaku at her door, and he looked like absolute shit. Not that he was now unattractive to her, but rather, he looked like he hadn't slept, hadn't showered, and hadn't changed his clothes in ages. Tamari turned the door handle and opened the door wide, taking in all of the man's appearance from head to toe. He held a small box in his arms, and his typically sharp eyes looked slightly glazed and rimmed with red. His usually perfectly kept hair was frazzled and several strands had escaped their ponytail. To Tamari, this looked like a man who needed help, and he had come to her to get it. They stood there, assessing each other for a few moments, saying nothing and doing nothing. Shikaku was the first to crack. He tossed his box inside the door, the metal weapons clanking against each other as it hit the floor. He strode into the room purposefully before reaching up and grabbing the throat of the woman who ruined everything. Tamari gasped in surprise at first, but as the door slammed shut and he shoved her into the wall that ran perpendicular to it, the blonde couldn't help but feel that this wasn't going to go as badly as she thought it might. The look on Shikaku's face was different than any other time. In the past, it was pure lust and hunger. It wasn't emotional or meaningful. It was animalistic in nature, and his eyes always said it all. This time, the man looked like he might either fall apart or smash her skull in. He was warring with himself, she could see that clearly enough. He went through cycles of rage and misery every few moments. His hand gripped her throat hard, but not hard enough to strangle her. As waves of rage overcame him, his hand would tighten briefly, then loosen again. Only a few moments had passed, but both of them had remained silent, staring at one another and trying to decide the next move. It seemed they both decided at the same time. With his fingers still wrapped around her milky white throat, Shikaku slammed his lips into hers. At the same instant, Tamari reached up and began tugging down the zipper of his Junin vest. His lips were dry and rough, but his tongue was soft and hot as it entered her mouth and pressed against her own. Tamari slipped her hands under the heavily padded material of Shikaku's vest, her fingers spreading and crawling over the fishnet-covered flesh of his chest. Through the crossed lines of thread, she felt the thick, puckered scars which marred his skin, and she was reminded of that first day in the desert oasis. That first succulent sin was so innocent, yet the consequences were extreme. As the blonde's fingers traces the scars down to his stomach, she felt Shikaku's lips pull away from hers, a line of saliva trailing from their open mouths. They both panted for air as they stared deeply into each other's eyes, as if they were both returning to that day not so long ago. Shikaku had awoken to the sight of the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, her golden hair glowing as if lit from behind. Her dark green eyes looked concerned, but all he could feel was relief. At last, the pain was over. At last, he could be at peace. "Are you an angel sent to take me to heaven?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Have I actually made it to paradise?" Before he could hear her beautiful voice and before he could get his answer, the world turned to blackness once more. He woke again to an even more beautiful sight than the last, confirming his suspicions that he was, indeed, in heaven. There was no other explanation for something so perfect and so indescribably awe-inspiring as the woman bathing before him. Her skin was white as cream, with clearly defined muscles, but fat in all the right places. Her S were a supple C or D cup, with perky pink S that stood erect despite the heat of the day. As she leaned back to wash her golden locks, the top of her pelvis was revealed. It was perfectly hairless save for a small square of gold directly above her slit. As the arch of her back began to relax and the woman returned to her natural standing state, he allowed his eyes to move back up to the woman's face, where their eyes locked. Hers showed surprise, fear, embarrassment, and a hint of longing. That hint gave him hope, and that hope was what he held onto as she approached him. "You really must be an angel. Is this paradise, my dear? Do I get to live here with you forever?" They both moaned, thinking of the events that came after. She was a virgin and he was delusional, but the passion between them was undeniable. Despite all that had happened and all that had been lost, the lust and need still remained. The emptiness in Shikaku's gut still remained since the loss of his family and his home. All he wanted to do was feel something, anything. His grip around the woman's throat tightened once more as a wave of rage passed over him. Using the strength of his arm alone, he pulled her a few inches closer, before slamming her back into the wall. Her head bounced forward from the impact, and there was an audible crunch, but no permanent damage was done to either wall or skull. She didn't make a sound, but simply watched him with an impassive yet lustful expression. He was angry because he wanted her, and every time he caught himself wanting her, his rage resurfaced. Despite that, he found himself wanting her more with each passing moment and each interaction he remembered. With his free hand, Shikaku cupped one of Tamari's large S, gripping it roughly. His face dipped and he nipped her jaw below the ear. At this, she squeaked audibly and squirmed slightly in his grip. He growled in response, tightening his hand on her throat in warning. Tamari, not fazed much by the threat of her windpipe being crushed, lifted her left leg gracefully, before wrapping it seductively around the man's waist. With a deft flex of the thick muscles of her thigh and calf, she pulled Shikaku's body forward, pressing it against her own, hard. To make her point more clear, she began to grind against him, pressing his pelvis into her own. Shikaku snarled aggressively in response, shifting his free left hand from a cupping position in order to grab her with his forefinger and thumb. With no hesitation whatsoever, he twisted sharply. Tamari let out a loud "ah," but refused to release him. Unable to convince her with pain, the old Nara changed tactics and released both her throat and then quickly snapped up both thighs and lifted them to either side of his hips. He ground his very clear erection into her more easily than before. They stayed like that for several long moments, pressing into each other's nether regions and rotating their hips in unison. Tamari couldn't help but release a low moan, her shorts soaked through from desire. In a sudden shift, Shikaku spun her around and slammed her back into the opposite wall of the entryway, harder this time than before. A clear crack formed in the dry wall, but it was ignored by both parties, and the Nara suddenly jerked his head forward, snarled, and bit down on the top of the blonde's exposed shoulder. It wasn't a playful, "why" bite. It was a hard, flesh-puncturing, blood-welling bite. Despite her training and experience, her lust-laced mind couldn't stop her before she let out a scream. As her brain caught up to her instincts, she immediately cut off the noise, but Shikaku had already covered her mouth with his own. She tasted copper and assumed he was smearing her blood all over her face with his lips. She glanced at her shoulder as they battled with their tongues, and she saw the gore of her wound. The blood was welling out quite heavily, flowing down her arm and dripping onto the expensive carpet below. The pain and the blood both excited her more, driving her deeper into her UAL frenzy. Their kiss broke apart once more, revealing just how much blood was smeared on both their faces. Neither cared, though, as they began tearing at each other's clothing with desperation. Shikaku didn't even bother lifting Tamari's garments off, but rather tore her shirt with one sharp jerk of his arm. The material fluttered to the floor in tatters. Her shorts were made of thicker material, so he simply jerked them down until they fell to her ankles. He took her panties with them at the same time. Exposed, Tamari immediately tore at the man's fishnet, easily ripping a line down the center, not dissimilar to the line he had torn in her own shirt. She shoved both the fishnet and his Junin vest off in one movement, before tearing down the fly to his pants, and letting them fall to the ground. Released from its prison, Shikaku's elongated member sprang upwards into its fully erect position. She had never thought about it before, but he was larger than she expected. Her thought didn't have much time to form before he was on her once again. This time, he grabbed her upper arms, the one was slick with blood, and spun her around so her face was pressed against the wall. He grabbed her hips roughly and began sliding his cock between her thighs, then up and down her slit. He quickly became coated in her slippery juices, and began to rub faster. Tamari gasped several times, first at the heat of him, then in ever-increasing pleasure as the head brushed her hypersensitive clit over and over. Before long, she had had enough. "I can't handle this anymore," she shouted. The blonde slammed herself backwards, ramming Shikaku into the opposite wall as he had done to her. She spun before he could recover and gripped both of his wrists. She released one, only to bend his wrist in such a way that he was forced to bend lest she break his wrist and arm in the process. She then rotated her grip, twisting his arm around behind him. He regained his posture now, but before he could do anything in retaliation, she hand-twisted his elbow and wrist into a lock behind his back. She pressed firmly against him and his face pressed into the wall. "Now that I have you where I want you," she began, her voice not but a whisper against his left ear, "it's my turn to control the pace of things. It's my turn to show you fury and hate." Gripping his right wrist in her hand to keep him from moving, she used her left to scrape deep gashes in his back. Though his front was heavily scarred from his near-death experience in the desert, his back was nearly completely unscathed. Well, it was until her nails did their work and blood began to well from the wounds. "Do you know what I'm sacrificing by taking what I want? I'm a fucking princess. If word gets back to Sanagakure about what I've done, my dear brother will probably kill me." She paused, listening to his panting, "If I can't have you, I'll have nothing." She pressed her S against him as she whispered, her milky skin becoming stained by his blood. She ignored it, however, more engrossed in the struggling man in front of her. "You had a choice, you vile woman. You chose to do this. I had no such choice. You say that, but it was you who put his prick into me the first time we met. Don't forget that, you son of a bitch. You wanted me. You still want me just as bad." With a roar of rage, Shikaku kneeled suddenly. Not expected such a simple maneuver, Tamari lost her grip on his wrist, allowing him to twist away. In an instant, he rushed forward again, keeping low. He stretched his arms out, wrapped them around her waist, and lifted her in a bear hug grip. She struggled and fought but could not break his hold as he carried her to the bed in the middle of the main part of the room. He slammed her into the mattress, causing the pair of them to bounce several times before settling. He pinned her there with his body, her legs once again on either side of him. "I'm sick of denying my body what it wants and needs," He growled, his voice giving off a hint of a whine as the frustration really came through. Tamari didn't have a moment to feel sorry for him as suddenly his hips thrust forward and he slammed deep into her, sheathing his entire length inside her core. Her head tilted backward as she let out a silent cry. He pulled out slowly, agonizingly so, until only the very tip was held in place by her trembling folds. He waited a moment, glaring at the woman before him with hate and lust and also a hint of relief. She stared back at him with those eyes that still reminded him of Kirigakure. With a sigh of defeat, he leaned forward, buried his face in her neck, and slammed back into her. He continued this time, but didn't pull as far out as he pounded into her over and over again. The bumps and ridges of her womanhood gripped him softly but firmly with each thrust, and as he fucked her this time, unexpected tears leapt to his eyes. Despite the emotion, he continued rotating his hips, picking up speed gradually as his need arose. The noises Tamari was making only helped to spur him on as he came close to the finish. Just as he was reaching his peak, the blonde suddenly wrapped her legs tightly around him and flexed her thighs, forcing him to remain thrust deep into her, but unable to move. Tamari stared at the man hovering above her, tears streaking his stubbled cheeks. She stared at him with an intensity she never showed before. It was a fiercely protective, almost angry look, but the anger was not directed at him, but his pain. Her thighs relaxed after a moment, and he pulled out of her. She guided him onto the bed, which by now was streaked with blood from both their wounds. Shikaku lay on his back, watching her as she moved. With each movement, her S bounced and jiggled ever so slightly, like a jello mold that had been poked. This time, Tamari moved to straddle the older Nara, his soaked erection poised just below her entrance. She gripped his shaft roughly, staring at him with the same protective intensity as before. Shikaku lifted his hands so they slid up her soft, pale thighs, then rested them gently on her hips. At that moment, she slid him inside her, and he couldn't help but groan from the heat of her. She started slow, only lifting herself slightly each time she moved. Her S bobbed and swayed as she lowered herself back down, and he couldn't help but be entranced by their movements. It was almost as if they defied the laws of physics, one moving left while the other moved diagonally. As big and perfect as these were only something he had dreamed of while married to such a small woman as Yoshino. With a sudden growl of loss and anger, he gripped Tamari's hips hard enough to dig his nails in, thrusting deep inside her before she had a chance to move. He lifted his knees, spreading his thighs and tilting her body forward until her S dangled a few centimeters above his chest. With only a moment to recover her balance and keep from falling on top of him, Tamari quickly braced herself with an arm above his head before he began pounding her hard and fast. With each jackhammer thrust of his hips, her S swung around wildly, the S brushing the hard flesh of his chest to make them tingle with pleasure. He released one of her hips in order to reach up and grab her left, which he promptly held to his open mouth. He suckled it, before extending his tongue and flicking the several times and then suckling again. All the while, he never broke the rhythm of his desperate thrusting. As he pounded her, Tamari couldn't help but cry out in bliss. She had never been fucked like this. When she had him in the desert, it was slow and deliberate. With Shikamaru, it was fast and hard, but unskilled and clumsy. The second time with Shikaku in the alley was too quick and awkwardly positioned to be amazing. This time though, when they had all the time in the world, she didn't hold back and neither did he. After what seemed like a millennia of fast, desperate hip movements, the pair clinging to one another as if they were the last anchor to the real world, Tamari's muscles began to shudder, then tense as a wave of pleasure blinded her and rendered her unable to move. Despite her incapacitation, Shikaku did not pause, and simply picked up the slack and pumped into her faster than before, with a fervor he didn't think possible. In a few moments, he too was reaching his climax, as his balls clenched and he felt his seed shoot deep into her 1, 2, 3 times. He continued thrusting for a few seconds before the sensations became too intense and he was forced to stop. Tamari clung to him for a few moments longer, shuddering and gasping from the waves still racking through her body. When it finally stopped and her toes uncurled, she allowed herself to let go and rolled to the side. The creamy mix of their fluids spilled out of her, but she didn't care. She lay there, gasping for air, unable to formulate any meaningful thought. They both lay there for over 10 minutes before Shikaku finally spoke to break the silence. I guess we've both sacrificed everything for this. I know it will be worth it. I can show you I'm worth it. I don't even know you. Isn't that the best part? The learning? I want to know you too. I want to know what you like and what every part of you tastes like. I want to know stupid things like your favorite color and what foods you hate. I just want to know you and be with you. Tamari finished her statement, turning over to look at him, propping herself up on an elbow. I don't think I love you, not yet, but I think I can. I've never loved anyone before. She added. Sea green. He stated simply. What? My favorite color. It's sea green. The color of your eyes. She stared at him for a few seconds in stunned silence, unable to respond. Mine's purple. Well, lavender, really. Light purple. It reminds me of my mother. He began to chuckle, very deep in his chest at first so it was barely audible, then louder and more pronounced, until it was a long heart laugh. Tamari just continued staring at him in wonder. It was strange, seeing him like this. She had only ever seen the lust and the anger. She had never seen joy. It's a bit strange, doing this after so long. I haven't had to get to know a woman in over 20 years. Well, we're the only ones we've got, so we might as well get used to it. They talked for the rest of the afternoon, and well into the night. They ordered dinner to the room, and lay in bed. They had again several times throughout the day, but it was less violent than it had been. This time it was more like making love, though they were still trying to figure out if such a thing could exist between them. Mostly, they talked about each other and their lives. Tamari told him about her life with a cruel father, then a sadistic brother. She told him what it was like to grow up in Sanagakure where the women were expected to be just as strong as the men, but were treated worse in every respect. He told her of his early life as a student, then when he met his wife. He explained how he was forced to kneel to this woman who ran his life and his household, and the slow decline in their life. Tamari listened to this patiently, even consoling him as he cried again. By the end of his outpouring, they had both fallen asleep from the exhaustion of the whole day. They lay in the bed, sound asleep, with Shikaku's head cradled against Tamari's chest, as if she were the elder of the two. Maybe this could work after all, and maybe all was not lost. Only time would tell. A sinister shaft of light pierced through the thick lids of Tamari's eyes, forcing her from the first truly comfortable and content sleep of her life. She grimaced at first, refusing to surrender to the evil that was the sun. She persisted for a few moments, demanding that her body return to sleep, but it was to no avail. In the end, she was forced to open her eyes and deal with the torture of daylight. In the middle of the night, the scarred Nara must have rolled onto his other side, for he slept rather awkwardly, splayed out on his stomach, with his right arm hanging off the side of the bed. His hair was wild, tangled in many places, and sticking out in random spikes here and there. As she shifted on the bed to get up and close the blinds, he stirred. She proceeded to the window, passing his side of the bed to do so, and tugged on the cord which controlled the angle of the shutters. As she turned back to return to the bed, she caught the dark, reddened eyes of the man she had so desperately perused for the last few weeks. At first, Tamari sensed a hunger in his eyes which her body answered in kind. After a moment, however, they shifted to the floor and a deep shame seemed to enter his features. He rolled onto his back and released a deep sigh. Tamari's gut clenched. She ignored it and approached him, sitting on the bed next to his thigh. Last night had been difficult for them both. She fell asleep feeling hopeful, but she wasn't so sure now. She didn't know what to think now. They were both very tightly wound last night, and hope was the only thing keeping them from falling into despair. What's supposed to happen now? The Nara whispered, we can't hide in this hotel room for the rest of our lives. I figured we could live like every other normal person in the world, she responded brightly, get a place together, get some furniture or something, and maybe plant a garden. Shikaku's expression darkened as he continued to stare at the white ceiling. He closed his eyes and released another long sigh before turning his head to face her. His expression didn't lighten. I had forgotten, last night, how young you really are. Tamari's gut clenched again, and she hugged her middle self-consciously. She looked away for only a moment before snapping her gaze back to him. She was not the kind of person to take an insult lying down. She worked too hard for this. My age has no relevance, just as yours does not. You were never attracted to my youth, nor my beauty, just as I was not attracted to your experience or body. She leveled her gaze at him, holding it for a few moments to make sure he was paying attention, This didn't happen because of some shallow impulse. We were drawn to each other because we both needed something in our lives. Shikaku growled a warning, my life was fine before you came. I needed nothing. He roared, now I've lost it all. He trailed off, turning away from her once again. He covered his face with his hands. You know as well as I do that you were not happy with her. You told me how she treated you like an idiot. She abused you and humiliated you. She did not respect you. Shikaku didn't respond to her statement, my life has been just as miserable. If I didn't get treated as a dainty princess, I got groped and catcalled. You were the first man to ever see me as something more. It doesn't matter if it started with, because I know it's more than that. You saw me, the real me. The dark-haired man uncovered his face and stared at this young woman who saved him in the desert. Every word she had said was true. He knew deep in his soul that he was unhappy with Yoshino. He had been unhappy for a long time. The question he needed to ask himself was this. Could they work it out and fix the problem, or was it a hopeless situation? For now, he was satisfied knowing that he had a choice to make. For now, he would take his time with this woman and learn every part of her body and soul. He needed to know what he was throwing his life away for. He needed to know that she was worth it, because damn it all, he knew he could love her if he tried. I want to go out and have breakfast with you today. No more room service. The Nara's gravelly voice rumbled. Let's get cleaned up, then we'll go. Tamari's frown slowly evolved into a cat-like grin as she caught his implication. The single word, let's, was an invitation to join him in the shower. She wasn't going to pass that one up. Last one to the shower gets to stand on the cold side. She shouted, before bounding out of bed and dashing to the bathroom. Shikaku sighed heavily. It was not going to be easy being with a younger woman who was still so full of energy. With a grunt, he put his hands together and activated his clan ninjutsu. The shadows in the room coalesced into a line which quickly snaked towards the sprinting woman. As she reached the door, his shadow connected and she suddenly froze in place. Shikaku heard her furious curse as he shifted his chakra flow to keep her frozen but stop her from copying his every movement. You forget, Tima-chan. I've been doing this a lot longer than you. With a slanted smile on his face, Shikaku walked towards the blonde, passed her completely, and entered the bathroom. His stride was lazy and slow. He was stretching this out as long as he could to prolong her shame at being so easily defeated, and to also show her that speed wasn't everything. He only released her as he approached the shower. He reached inside and turned the tap to hot. When he turned around, his vision was filled with the most amusing sight of his life. Tamari stood facing him, completely nude. Her large S were accentuated by two bumpy, hardened S. Her left hip was slightly cocked to the side as her hand rested on it in outrage. Her slightly spread thighs revealed just a hint of what lay between them. The most amusing, however, was her face. Combined with the delicious, wide body in front of him, her expression threw the whole thing upside down. She was pouting. Shikaku couldn't help it. He burst out laughing. He laughed and laughed so hard that his abdominal muscles began to cramp from the strain and he began to gasp from the lack of oxygen. He dropped to the floor of the bathroom, resting his back against the shower glass, unable to stand from the sheer force of his amusement. Unfortunately, the laughter only made her pout more, which made him laugh harder until he was quite literally crying from it all. It took several long minutes of panting and gasping on the floor before he recovered from his bout of hilarity. And only after he finally stopped did Tamari step over him and enter the shower. He hadn't laughed that hard in a good long time. Okay, you win. Take the warm spot in the shower, princess. He chuckled, it's been a while since I could laugh like that without fearing for my life. How do you know I'm not planning your demise right now? She asked, her voice icy. Well, I'm sure I can convince you to think about some other things, he growled seductively, before entering the shower behind her. It didn't take long for his arousal to become apparent as he pressed himself against her back. The water was already cascading down her body, plastering her hair to the back of her neck. As he pressed his olive skin against her milky white, the water began to warm him as well. Tamari moaned with longing and pressed herself into his erection. Shikaku chuckled again, but instead of giving in to her want, he pulled her back out of the stream of water. With a quick twist of his hand, he pumped out a handful of body wash from the hotel soap dispenser, and began to massage it into her ass and stomach, still standing behind her. As her skin became slick from the soap, His fingers began to slip and slide over the squishy mounds. The softness was unlike anything he had felt before. It was as if he had mounds of pure silk in his hands. As her S slipped between the spaces of his fingers, Tamari arched her back and gasped. Clearly the lubrication was good for her too. Having spent plenty of time on her S, he began to move his hands downwards, then shifted them to rest between them. He began to massage the soap onto the flesh of her soft ass, then her lower back. As she became more and more soapy, it became easier for Shikaku's cock to slide between her thighs. With a groan, the Nara began rocking his hips against her, rubbing his shaft back and forth. The heat from her womanhood was unbearable as her moist outer lips caressed the top of him. With his urgency building, Shikaku moved them back into the stream of the shower and allowed the water to quickly rinse the soap from their bodies. All the while, he continued pressing his erection into her. Once the soap was gone, he turned her forcefully and pressed her against the glass of the shower. He watched with satisfaction as her S pressed against the cold glass and flattened. He pulled her hips back, lowering her body so she was bending over slightly. With very little warning, he lined himself up behind her, before sliding deep into her dripping entrance. She moaned from the feeling of being filled by him once again, and began to move her hips against him. With a growl, Shikaku leaned forward, pressing his entire chest against her back. He wrapped one arm around her stomach, and used the other to grip her hip before he began thrusting in and out hard and fast. He didn't continue for long, however, since it became quite obvious that the position was uncomfortable for Tamari. Her head was bent at an awkward angle, her cheek and shoulder banging against the glass with each thrust. Gasping from the desperate need to be inside her, Shikaku pulled out. He spun her around, lifted her off her feet and slammed her back against the glass of the shower once again. With his hands gripping her supple ass, and her thighs wrapped tightly around his hips, he slid back inside her and resumed his thrusting. He dipped his head down greedily and took her left into his mouth. He sucked and nibbled with eager lips, flicking it with his tongue as his slick manhood pumped within her. Tamari's moans began low in her throat at first, but soon they became gasping shouts as the combination of his thick cock and his skilled tongue sent her into a frenzy of pleasure. He began to nearly bounce her up and down onto his manhood, which only increased the pleasure coursing through her body. It didn't take long before her thighs began to tighten around him and her moans became higher pitched. After a few more moments of unrelenting pounding, Tamari gasped and her body shuddered with release. Recognizing her orgasm, Shikaku continued thrusting, holding her body tight against his. He slowed his pace as she began to relax around him, and after a moment of gasps he stopped completely. He slid out of her and then placed her back on her feet. With absolutely zero interaction, Shikaku dipped his head under the stream of the shower and began to wash his hair. Tamari stood there, dazed and shaking, unable to understand what had just happened. After a few moments of recovery, she began to wash her own hair, before finishing off some of the parts of her body which were forgotten in the initial soapy exchange. Cleaned to perfection, they turned off the steamy water and began to dry themselves, ignoring each other as they went through the deeply ingrained habits of personal hygiene. Neither Shikaku nor Tamari were capable of clear thought, so the mundane actions of drying were helpful. As they walked into the main room, dry and clean for the most part, Shikaku began to dress. Tamari made a dissatisfied harumph before striding across the room and grabbing the older man's wrists in her hands. "Now, we'll have none of that until you've been properly cleaned, Mr. Nara." With no other indication as to her intention, Tamari knelt down, lifted his semi-flaccid shaft and slipped it into her open mouth. Immediately, the flesh began to grow and expand. In moments, it doubled in size, nearly choking her as it filled every space available. Before she really did gag, she pulled her head back to give his erection enough space. With a smile in her eyes, since her lips were otherwise engaged, she began to slowly slide her head forward and back, applying just enough suction to make him groan from the feel of it. Her tongue dove forward as she drew his tip toward the front of her mouth. She flicked the dexterous muscle here and there, slithering it around the head with finesse and skill. After a moment, she began bobbing her head forward and back with increasing speed. Her right hand gripped the base of his shaft, sliding up and down with the motion of her head. Shikaku threw his head back, unable to complain about the delay, and unable to do more than groan as this amazing, beautiful woman pleasured him incessantly. His breath picked up as she began to bob faster and faster, gripping him with her hand and her lips at the same time. As she lifted her left hand to cup and rub his balls, a deep, guttural moan escaped his clenched teeth. He began to rock his hips against her, begging her to take him deeper. With slight trepidation, she gave in, allowing him to shove himself deep into her throat. She fully expected to gag, but to her surprise, she did not. She allowed him to thrust into her throat several more times before pushing back on his hips to tell him to stop. He did so with obvious difficulty, getting in one final thrust despite her protesting squeak. To reward his patience, she began moving her head faster, increasing the suction and stroking him at the same time. This time, Shikaku could barely keep himself upright, and he gripped the dresser behind him to avoid collapsing. He felt a tightening deep within, and he knew he was about to come. With a cry, he thrust his hips again, gripping the back of her head forcefully with one hand while the other supported his weight. He shot his seed deep within her throat, his cock pulsing with each string he released. Tamari dutifully swallowed the thick fluid, struggling to pull enough hair through her nostrils as he held her head in place. As the last of it emptied down her throat, he released her and withdrew, slumping against the wood of the dresser. "I don't understand how you're so good at that," he mumbled, panting from the orgasm. "I've never felt anything so fucking good." Tamari grinned, wiping a little residue from the corner of her mouth. She tossed a shirt to him before fishing her own outfit out of her bag. They both dressed slowly, not really caring what time it was, or where they were going. Tamari knew she would have another meeting today, but it wasn't until this afternoon. She could take her time. Shikaku dressed as he always did, wearing a simple fishnet shirt covered by the typical dark blue, long-sleeved shirt. He also donned matching dark blue pants and shoes. He expertly gathered his dark brown locks into one hand and secured it at the crown of his head. It drooped slightly, still heavy from water. Tamari decided it would be best to dress in her official business clothing, despite the reputation that would obviously precede her now that her actions would be out in the open. First, she stepped into a clean pair of lavender panties and snapped on her matching bra. Next, she shimmied into her fishnet leggings. After they were sufficiently positioned, she slipped her arms through the sleeves of her formal black kimono. She folded one side over the other before wrapping her waist with the red obi. She wrapped the silk cloth around herself 3 times before tying a large bow in the back. After her clothes, Tamari took several minutes brushing her rapidly drying hair, before deftly quartering it into 4 ponytails which she tied off. Not a hair out of place, she stood and began to walk towards the door, only glancing back to see that Shikaku was following. Shikaku led them through the streets brusquely, but despite their pace, Tamari couldn't help but notice the sideways glances she got from random strangers. She was used to this, being an outsider and a member of the family which previously attacked the village. It was a different kind of look, however. It wasn't a look of fear or distrust. Rather, it was outright loathing and distaste. People whispered to each other as she passed. They crossed their hearts or spat on the ground. This was something different entirely, and she couldn't help but feel a tension in her chest as guilt crept through her. It was a relief once they finally reached their destination. They entered a very small restaurant with only 3 or 4 tables inside. Since it was late morning, there was only a single man eating his noodles in the corner. Tamari sighed, glad to avoid the awkwardness of eating in a restaurant filled with those disapproving eyes. They sat at a table located in the corner opposite the other customer, and they glanced lazily at the menu. There were several set meals to choose from, including the traditional Konoha breakfast, which consisted of pancakes, jam, some simple sausages and some bread. There was also a Suna-style breakfast which Tamari was familiar with. It came with a fresh fruit salad, spicy eggs and tofu dumplings. This restaurant even served the strange seafood-based kirigakure breakfast, which consisted of a large roasted fish, some calamari and a delicious miso soup. All the meals also came with green tea. Tamari opted for the Konoha meal, having never tried the traditional dish before, and wanting to avoid fish for the time being. Shikaku ordered the same. As the server was finishing up with taking their order, he squinted at Tamari as if he was trying to remember who she was. Aren't you that Suna girl? Tamari. He paused, grinning. You're the sister of Gara, the cage, no? Tamari nodded solemnly, waiting for the verbal attack to come and accepting it. I thought so, I thought so. I'm happy you came to this place. It's famous for the traditional breakfast. I'm sure you'll have a fine meal. This Shikaku-sama knows how to pick the best place in town to show our guests. With a sigh of relief, Tamari nodded and smiled. Thank you, I really appreciate the kindness. Ah, it's no problem, miss. I'll be back with your meals in no time. As the man left, Tamari turned back to Shikaku, the smile still gracing her lips. He smiled back before grabbing one of her hands. Tamari looked away sheepishly and pulled her hand back a few inches, out of his reach. She was still feeling odd after so many strange looks from the villagers. Shikaku grunted, but allowed her to pull away without complaint. I'll have to find a more permanent place to stay today. He stated bluntly, I think I'll look while you're in your meeting this afternoon. Any requests? Tamari grinned, enjoying the fact that she was being included in his decision, despite the temporary nature of her presence in Konoha. She put a finger to her lips in thought and cocked her head slightly to the side. Well, a garden is a must. It's much cheaper to grow your own vegetables and flowers, rather than buying from someone else. She paused, thinking for another moment. I think an extra bedroom would be nice as well. You never know what our future may hold. You're not thinking? Chill. No. No, definitely no. Not at all. I was thinking something a little more adult. Shikaku's expression notably dropped at her sudden and vehement refusal, but he quickly hid it behind a mask of desire. That sounds interesting. I think I can manage that. Tamari didn't miss his reaction, but didn't prod him for details. Instead, she stored the information for later, when they were in a more private setting. After a few more moments of playful banter about what they could do with that second bedroom, their food arrived, steaming hot. The pancakes were fluffy and golden brown. The jam was strawberry, and the sausages looked deliciously greasy. Perfect for keeping her energy up during the day. She quickly began slicing into each morsel, and ungracefully shoved piece after piece into her mouth. Shikaku chuckled at her unladylike behavior, and began to eat his own meal, albeit much slower. As he placed his second bite of sausage in his mouth, the door to the restaurant suddenly burst open and a familiar figure rushed to their table, his long blonde hair trailing behind him. Inoichi gripped his longtime friend's upper arm, his expression panicked. He didn't even glance at Tamari before diving into his explanation. Shika, you have to come with me right now. It's Yoshino. Shikaku's face went cold as ice. What happened? Your son found her this morning. His skin paled and Tamari's gut dropped. She's not, is she? His voice cracked from the anxiety of the situation. She's alive, Shika, but she's at the hospital. Sakura doesn't know how long she was there, so it's impossible to say what will happen. She cut herself, Shika. She cut her own throat from the pain of it all. Shikaku let out an animalistic sob, the like of which Tamari had never heard before, let alone from a grown man. Her heart was breaking for him. She couldn't imagine what he was feeling at this moment. This was all her fault. All their fault. Yoshino might die and it was because of their actions. When Shikaku looked at her, all she could see was empty defeat. She wanted to go to him and comfort him, but she couldn't move. She could barely breathe. She was frozen. Tamari didn't even react when Inoichi helped drag his friend out of his chair and supported him while they left the restaurant. Only after he was gone did she allow the tears to flow from her eyes. He was going to leave her. Despite everything they had just gone through, he would still go back to Yoshino. He couldn't lose her. All was not lost for him, not yet. He could still be forgiven. He had somewhere to go. Unfortunately for Tamari, she had nothing to go back to. This was the end of it all. Shika, you have to come with me right now. It's Yoshino. Shikaku took a moment to comprehend his blonde friend's words as the man gripped his upper arm with urgency. As the words sunk into his brain, his eyes widened and his brain raced to every possible conclusion. Has someone hurt her? Did she hurt herself at home, with nobody to take care of her? Had she stopped eating? Did she find another man? None of these conclusions were impossible, but he had to know for sure. What happened? He demanded, his voice icy as steel. He didn't even spare a glance for the woman seated across from him, too focused on the possibilities as guilt bloomed in his heart once again. Your son found her this morning. Inoichi began explaining, and Shikaku's heart nearly stopped. She's not, is she? He stammered, unable to voice the possibility aloud. His voice cracked slightly, but his face was a mask of ice and stone. She's alive, Shika, but she's at the hospital. Sakura doesn't know how long she was there, so it's impossible to say what will happen. Inoichi paused for air, his face distraught and his hands shaking as he continued to grip his comrade's arm. She cut herself, Shika. She cut her own throat from the pain of it all. Shikaku couldn't stop the sound that ripped itself from his throat as the guilt bubbled over. The molten lava he had felt hours before was replaced with ice, and every part of his body became numb from it. He felt like the very soul had been ripped from his body, and was floating several feet behind him, watching it all. She cut her own throat from the pain of it all. The words repeated in his mind over and over, on an endless loop of torment. It was his fault, all his fault. He had done this to her. He had pushed her to this point and she couldn't take it anymore. She would rather die than live with the pain of his betrayal. How could he have thought about being happy when his wife, the woman he had loved for nearly 20 years, had nothing left but pain? He glanced at Tamari, not with anger, but with desolation. This was the end. The dark-haired shinobi allowed his friend to lift him to his feet and support him as they left the restaurant. He could barely feel his feet touch the floor with each step. He didn't spare a second glance for the woman who had given him hope. He hadn't stopped to think that his wife's hope had been stolen in the process. Shikaku didn't remember much about the trip to the hospital. He felt like he was floating on clouds, not all there. He was sitting in a waiting area with cushioned benches. His son was there, tears streaming down his face. Inoichi paced up and down the hall, tugging on the end of his long ponytail. The strange part about this particular hallway was that Shikaku had a very clear memory of standing here years ago. His son was there, and so was she. This was the place he had first met her, first spoken aloud in her presence. At the time, he didn't think much about it, since his son was clearly growing close to her. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking that day. The numbness in the scarred ninja's mind was protecting him and allowing him to separate himself from the feelings that were deeper. He knew on some level that this was shock, and it wouldn't last. It did, however, allow him some clarity when it came to his situation. He was able to process things logically and with some distance that he was not able to before. Tamari was refreshing. She was so different from his wife, but similar in some ways as well. The woman's single-minded determination reminded him of Yoshino in her youth. Her fiery temper too, though Yoshino's had evolved since then into a need for absolute control in all things. What he really enjoyed about the blonde desert ninja was her drive. Yoshino seemed satisfied as a housewife and nothing more. She would never change or evolve or improve. Tamari had the drive and the potential to become the best she could be, and to take exactly what she wanted from life. At the same time, Shikaku made promises to Yoshino and to his son. He promised to be the kind of man who would protect his family and care for them. He promised to do this until death took him. What kind of man was he if he couldn't keep his word? He would be nothing without his word. It wasn't like he didn't love his wife. He loved her and cherished her more than he cared to admit out loud. The problem was that he wanted them both. He wanted the comfort and familiarity of his wife, and the excitement and potential of Tamari. Unfortunately for him, the world did not work in this way, and neither woman would settle for sharing. That he was sure of. He had to decide. This choice was on him and him alone. Shikaku was so deep in thought that he didn't notice the operating room light turn off and the double doors swing open. The sound of Sakura speaking did not reach his ears until Inoichi shook him forcefully. Suddenly all the sound came rushing in, as if the protective cotton had finally been lifted. "Shika, are you even listening? Hey." Inoichi's voice penetrated the fog. "That's right, focus man. What were you saying, Sakura-chan?" Yoshino-san cut deep. "It seems to me like she was very serious about ending her life. In most cases, there are hesitation marks around the wound, but there were none whatsoever." Sakura paused, her hard green eyes boring into Shikaku. "I repaired as much as I could, but there will be a scar. That's not my main concern though. If she truly meant to die, I worry she may attempt something like this again." Shikaku's gut twisted, forcing him to double over and gasp from the agony. He breathed deeply for several moments as the words were processed. He didn't know what to do or what to say. His wife wanted to die and she probably would no matter what he decided. He was supposed to be there and protect her. He was supposed to support her and never hurt her. What kind of man was he? "I can't believe this." It was Shikamaru. His face was streaked with tears as he leaned forward with his elbows on his thighs. "She never deserved this. With a sudden burst of all-consuming rage, Shikaku leapt from his bench and charged the boy who was the spitting image of himself. He lifted Shikamaru by his collar and slammed him against the wall. While the scarred man's face was screwed up into one of pain and fury, the boy's face remained impassive and his body limp. "Why do you get to feel angry, father? What has she ever done to you?" Shikaku roared before slamming the boy into the wall again. "I didn't ask for this to happen." "You didn't stop it though, did you?" the boy said quietly. How can a child understand the complexities of marriage and a lifetime of experiences? How can a child with zero experience with women judge anyone about these things? You do not know, you useless babe. You know absolutely nothing. With that, Shikaku dropped his son onto the bench and stormed away, unable to stand the hospital anymore. Unable to stand the people around him. Unable to stand himself. He wanted nothing more than to take a knife to his own throat to end this horrible feeling of indecision. Instead, he ended up at one of several training grounds at the forested outskirts of the village. This particular training ground was a dirt clearing with several wooden posts driven into the hard earth. Each post was cured and hardened with a mix of science and chakra to keep them from being too easily damaged by the force of a shinobi's training. Shikaku approached one of the posts, taking a series of deep breaths in an attempt to calm the raging tide within his very soul. He closed his eyes, focusing and concentrating. He needed the calm that came in the midst of battle. He needed the sharp clarity of precision and speed. He needed to think. His eyes snapped open and he began moving with the grace and speed only a well-honed body could manage. He kept to taijutsu, attacking the post with only his physical might. His skin burned and ached with each strike, but he did not relent. He bombarded the wood with strike after strike, all the while wishing it were his problems and his emotions and his fate. Even as his muscles began to protest and his skin began to bleed, he continued his assault. With a cry of sheer effort, Shikaku pushed through the pain and suddenly found the calm he was so desperately seeking. It was as if he came outside himself and inhabited a space not entirely on the same plane, like an invisible room filled with fog, but containing every memory and piece of information he had ever retained. He watched his body continue its movements, but in slow motion. His mind observed the scene with cold, calculated clarity. Time seemed to stretch as the possibilities spread before him. He knew this was the place he needed to be to decide. Disconnected, distanced and uninhibited. The answer became so stunningly obvious at that very moment that he almost laughed. How didn't he see it before? Why had he been so oblivious and self-absorbed? Decision made, he came back into his body slowly, with his senses returning gradually. As each moment passed, he realized that he had pushed himself farther than he had intended. His muscles screamed, his hands and shins bled freely and a wave of overwhelming exhaustion came over him. He sank to the ground, using the splintered post as a backrest, and promptly fell asleep. Aku, up, a deep, faraway voice penetrated the soft darkness. It was comfortable here, with nothing to worry about or to think about or to do. He drifted, ignoring the insistent voice that continued to probe into his cocoon of nothingness. A distant sensation of something being placed in a mouth he wasn't entirely connected to reached him. Despite his lack of concern for the material world, he was suddenly and harshly yanked back into consciousness as the flavor of berries and the sharp tang of copper exploded in his mouth. He jumped to his feet instantly, instincts and training overriding his delayed brain as he took a defensive position. Then the pain of his abused body registered and he fell to his knees with a groan. It took a moment for his eyes to focus on the huge man before him. He wore a green-gray plate with the Akamichi crest emblazoned on the front in red. His long and unruly red mane was blowing in the wind, and his chubby face squinted at him in concern. "Shikaku, what happened to you, man?" Chao's deep bass voice and soft hands were a familiar comfort, but as Shikaku's brain rebooted, so too did his memory. "I know what I have to do. I'm fine. It'll all be fine." With that, he struggled to his feet, pushed his friend aside, and headed to the one place he knew he had to be. The only place that mattered. With the only person that mattered. Tamari had returned to her hotel room after being forced to pay for a breakfast she was unable to eat. She felt utterly empty inside. Everything was finally working out and they were finally going to be together. It was perfect and wonderful and hopeful. Her heart clenched at the memory of the blonde ninja's news. She cut herself, Shika. She cut her own throat from the pain of it all. It echoed and cycled in her mind over and over. The news, the sound Shikaku made, his face. All of it was playing on repeat, combined with the conversation they had been having and the plans they had been making. In one instant, it all came crumbling down. She knew without a doubt that he would go back to his wife now. He had to. Tamari wasn't sure what she was going to do. She had her own choices to make now. She had no idea if news had reached Sanagakure, but even if it had, she had nowhere else to go but home. Despite the urge, there was a part of her heart that hoped Shikaku would come back to her. It was possible that his wife had died, but she knew there was a 50-50 chance that he would hate her and blame her for it. If the woman had survived, it was also a toss-up whether he wanted to be there for her or be angry with her. Anyway it went, their relationship would not be the same. The question was, how hard was she willing to fight? She had done so many questionable and downright awful things to get this far. She had become a terrible person to get what she wanted, and it still wasn't enough. Maybe it wasn't enough. What was she willing to do? Was there anything that she could do? And could she live with herself if she did? After several hours of lazy contemplation, a long bubble bath and a short workout, Tamari still hadn't come to a reasonable conclusion, nor had she made any decision either way. She decided she would let time tell, since the events of today left most of the decision in Shikaku's hands. She could decide what to do after more information presented itself. As fate would have it, a knock at the door broke her out of her thoughts, and her heart gave a hopeful leap. Was it him? Did he come back to sweep her off her feet and tell her everything would be okay again? Was he ready to finally leave it all behind and move forward with her? Tamari sauntered to the door with a smile plastered on her face. She was sure things would be just fine. The sound of his cry of agony at the news from this morning replayed in her mind and she faltered. Just for a second, the doubt was back. As she reached the door and turned the handle, her gut clenched and her chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment. No going back from here. The door swung open to reveal a butler with an envelope clasped in his hand. "Ma'am, I have a delivery for you." A letter could mean only one thing. She snatched the paper from his fingers, smoothing her face into a mask. She nodded to him in thanks, and closed the door before the flood of emotions came crashing through her at full force. She collapsed to the ground, the door to her back, as heaving sobs broke through. She let it happen, and didn't resist the heart-crushing sadness for several minutes. She clutched her chest as the pain tore at her. She hated herself for allowing these emotions, but she had nobody to be strong for. By herself, she could let it all go. When the emotion began to fade slightly, she tore open the letter with shaking fingers, careful not to damage the contents. As her watery eyes located the single sentence scrawled on the page, hot fury replaced the misery nearly instantly. "Princess, I know what is truly important to me, and I won't forget that again. Goodbye, Nara Shikaku." The sheer audacity that this man had astounded her. One sentence, after all that they shared and planned together? He would end it with one sentence? And in a letter, no less? Did she mean so little to him? Did he think she was a piece of trash to be discarded so carelessly after everything? She understood that they were new and they did not share a long history together, but she deserved to be respected enough to have this conversation face to face, and at length. She deserved some say in this decision. She deserved to be allowed to fight for her part in everything. But she wasn't, and going to him now would only show how very desperate she was. It would only prove to everyone that she was a stupid kid who only wanted to mess up other people's lives. It was over. This was it, and there was nothing she could do. He chose what he thought was truly important, and for him that meant family and his word. She was nothing to him. With a concentrated burst of chakra to her hand, she released a wave of sharpened wind energy and shredded the letter into confetti. In a moment of clarity, she got to her feet, held her head high, and gathered her belongings. She would return to Sanagakure and to her duty. She would be the best damn kunoichi the world had ever seen, and she would show the piece of shit that nothing could stop her. She left Konoha soon after, not even bothering to stop for food before she was leaping through the forest and toward home. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.